brought the contestants into a breakout room to have a private conversation with them so they could talk to me frankly without fear of being judged, literally and figuratively. I wanted to give them agency in a tournament decision that we made. Because we had some technical issues and needed to start a little bit later, we have decided to abbreviate the final round, so we won't be extending the time, which I think everybody in the room will appreciate. And so what that means is that we will have debates on 2 bills, and each presiding officer will preside over the bill, and then we'll take a 20-minute break in between, and then the next presiding officer will be elected and preside over that bill. So our projected time frame is to actually start debate on the first bill after I run the election at around 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and that will go to about 4:30 p.m. Eastern, or at which time 11 speakers have had the opportunity to speak on it. And then we'll start, there'll be a 20-minute recess. And then at around 4:50 p.m. Eastern, we'll start the next debate and go until about 5:50 p.m. or so on that particular debate. And that would be our time frame.
Great.
Okay?
Adam, will we need to have anything open besides the tap room ballot and this screen? We
Nope.
don't need the YouTube stream open or anything like that?
No, in fact, if you have the YouTube stream going, please close it, because that'll create a feedback echo for you.
I did.
Which is uncomfortable, to say the least. Okay, so at this time, let me get my straw poll ready. At this time, as chair I almost forgot the opening ceremonies because my mind is going a million miles a minute.
So you're going to join us in with all the students now?
Yes, they should all be here. You may need to, in the upper right-hand corner, click View and switch to Gallery.
I don't see that option.
Are you in this Zoom through the web browser or your Zoom app?
Web browser.
Okay. If you want to close that browser tab, go back to the blue icon to launch the Zoom, and then when it prompts you, click the app, Join with App option, and then type in Eagles, all lowercase, to access. Okay, excellent. Forgot about that little detail, because it's helpful to see everybody. Okay. So we'll wait for them to rejoin, and then we'll introduce everybody and have the election for the office of presiding officer. Okay, and then Dr. Edmonds, can you and Zach make sure that the browser Zoom is closed if you haven't already? Thank you. And Dr. Edmonds, as our parliamentarian, I have made you co-host, which will allow you to private chat with the student presiding officer. So if they have any questions, they can ask you. I'll also be on the meeting still, so questions can be directed to me as well.
Don't go anywhere, Adam. Sure.
Yes, sir. And then I'm just eyeballing here to see, ensure other panelists are here. Oh, look at that fancy virtual background too. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. All right. Now, here we go. It is my distinct honor as a special consultant to the Barclay Forum for High Schools for the Congressional Debate Tab, and on behalf of Tab Director Lydia Smith of the Barclay Forum at Emory University, to welcome you to this final round of Congressional Debate. Our esteemed panel of judges today, and as I call your name, you're free to wave, includes Dr. Mike Edmonds, acting co-president of Colorado College in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a Barclay Forum for High Schools Gold Key Society member, and fellow board member with me in the National Speech and Debate Association Board of Directors. Dr. Edmonds has been a regular fixture as an adjudicator for the final round, both at the Barclay Forum for High Schools, as well as at the National Speech and Debate Association National Tournament. And we are thrilled to have someone of his caliber with us today. And quite frankly, thrilled to have someone who could spend all of his efforts working at the higher education level, but puts a lot of care and compassion and time and thought into helping our high school speech and debate community be better, and particularly where it comes to issues of equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. And so we're really glad to have someone like Dr. Edmonds as part of our community today. We also have with us Representative Kathy Ashe, who's a former member of the Georgia House of Representatives, representing the 56th District from 1991 through 2012. Thank you for being with us, Representative Ashe. She has literally been in the shoes that all of you young people are emulating today at the state level. And as all of you know, from a federalism standpoint, all of the stuff that state legislators do is as important on a state basis as what the federal legislators do in the United States Congress at the national level. We have with us from the great city of Decatur, Georgia, its mayor, Patty Garrett. There you are, Patty. And with a beautiful flag hanging behind her. So very appropriate there. We have with us as well Senator Sally Harrell, member of the Georgia Senate since 2019, and who previously served in the Georgia House of Representatives from 1999 through 2005. So welcome, Senator. And finally, a former member of our adjudication panel in the final session here at the Barclay Forum for High Schools, and joining us again, Senator George Lemieux, former U.S. Senator from Florida, and chairman of the board for Gunster Yoakley Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale. As I remember Senator Lemieux very proudly enjoying the fact that there were several Floridians among the student competitors. We are, for the purposes of upholding the integrity of competition, we ask that you not disclose your schools or your states until after the senator and his colleagues on the panel have submitted their final rankings. But afterwards, if folks want to hang around and enjoy a little bit of political glad handing, you'll have the opportunity at that point to do so. So, we want to uphold the integrity of that. So without further ado, we will conduct an election for the office of presiding officer. And so as Chair Pro Tem, I'm going to open the floor for nominations at this time. The chair recognizes Senator Rafa Nengo, sorry.
That's totally fine. I know it's a mouthful. It's a long last name. I would love to nominate the Honorable Senator Beck.
I humbly accept.
Okay, thank you. Are there further nominations? Yes, Representative Torres, or Senator Torres.
Move to close the floor for presiding officer nominations.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Oh my goodness. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to close the floor for nominations. Then without objection, the chair will consider Senator Beck elected by acclamation by the chamber for the final round. Congratulations, President pro tempore of the Senate of the United States Congress. I pass the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jacoby. And I'd also like to thank the entire chamber and congratulate you for reaching this prestigious final round. Thank you so much for electing me. It's my honor to serve as your presiding officer in this final round. Let's just get the most important business out of the way, which is going to be selecting an agenda, and then I'll go over my procedure and send you my PO spreadsheet. On that note, I'm going to unilaterally open the floor for docket nominations. Is there any nominations at this time? Senator Rubis, go ahead.
I nominate Docket A, consisting first of the bill regarding gerrymandering and second of the bill regarding India.
All right. Are there any other nominations at this time? Senator Chandon.
Hi, barring any further nominations, I'm going to move to close the floor.
All right. Are there any objections to that motion? All right. Seeing none, so ordered. Our docket will be Docket A, a resolution to amend the Constitution to end partisan gerrymandering. That's item 18, followed by a bill to aid India against China and Pakistan, item 16. Congratulations, Mr. Rubis. On that note, I'd like to first share my PO spreadsheet, which can be found with a pretty easy bit link that I've just put in the chat. Here is where I'll be tracking who's speaking, and you'll also find my entire timing, amendment, and final appeal timing procedures all over there. So if you can just quickly navigate there, and once I see a lot of people trickling into the document, I'll go over my procedures. Alright, so now I see a considerable amount of people there, so I guess we'll get started. First, I want to go over how I'm going to be timing each speech. My timing signals are going to be pretty much standard NSDA. There's going to be one placard with the very colorful Emory University logo at 2 minutes, another placard at 2:30, another placard at 2:55, and then for final appeal speeches for the sponsor, there's going to be one placard at 30 seconds, another placard at 1 minute, and then another placard at 1:25. Now, Mr. Rodriguez was asking me this prior to session start, but I will give you a 15-second grace period for every single speech, meaning that at 3:05, I'm going to start a 10-second visual hand countdown, and then at 3:15, I'm going to verbally stop you. For final appeals, at 1:35, I'm going to start with the 10-second visual hand countdown, and then at 1:45, I'm going to cut you off. Zoom tends to give me audio priority when I speak over you, so just don't try to abuse that, right? Anyways, yeah, I think that's most of my procedures. When it comes to recognizing, questioning, and speaking, I'm going to look away from the monitor for just a couple seconds for everyone to get a chance to raise their placards, because number one, if I just recognize the first person to raise their placard, that would kind of be ableist, and Congress isn't a physical event. If it was, I'd be really bad at sports, so that's out of the question. And also, it's to make sure that everyone's connectivity differences are accounted for. With that, I think I can start the session if there's any more questions. Is there any questions? And then, of course, once full order is reached, I won't be looking away since I've already established a random order in both questioning and speaking. I don't see any questions. Let's get the session started. So at 2:34, I'm going to be using Eastern time, so I guess we should say 3:34 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to call this item off of the docket. Are there any sponsors at this time for a resolution to amend the Constitution to end partisan gerrymandering? All right, going to look away. All right, the speech goes to Senator Sun.
Thank you. That's Senator Sun, SUN, first time today, sponsoring today's amendment. Once again, SUN. Judges and parliamentarian, if you can see me fine and hear me fine, just let me know. And presiding officer, I'm going to assume you're always ready.
Yes, for going forwards, the chamber can assume that I'll always be ready. Thank you.
Awesome. Anyone not ready? We're all good. Okay, awesome. I'll get started. The gun is loaded, and it's just figuring out which target to point at and when to pull the trigger. These were the words uttered by an Arizona state lawmaker as part of a comprehensive pressure campaign against Arizona's Independent Redistricting Commission. After 5 years, the IRC won, because democracy always wins, even when there are those who thwart it with their cowardice. Don't be that lawmaker. Pass my amendment. I want to first diagnose the problem in the status quo, that being the misalignment of incentives for politicians when it comes to drawing the lines for electoral maps that get them elected. The issue in the status quo is that politicians want to draw lines favorable for their reelection. NBC explained in 2015 that politicians' incentives to be accountable to their people don't matter if they can decide the lines of the election in the first place, effectively giving them an advantage in their re-election campaign. In contrast, the incentives of the average American citizen are far more organic. Pew explains in August of 2017 that 67% of citizens say that serving jury duty is part of good citizenship, creating an incentive for them to do a good job. Why is my amendment analogous to this analogy? Because Section 4 of this amendment sets guidelines for how IRCs are going to be established, independent redistricting commissions, to either have random citizens or nonpartisan experts or both. Why is this preferable? The Brennan Center explains in July of 2018 that based on current state independent redistricting commissions, they recommend 1, screening applicants for disqualifications, which is how jury duty works, 2, including an element of randomness, also how jury duty works, and 3, qualitative assessments, exactly what today's legislation does with experts. The strength of an IRC is the number one way in which it can be independent in determining fair lines for an election, such that voters are choosing the politician, not the other way around. Why is this important? It decreases racial gerrymandering. The Washington Post explains in June of 2016 that Republican state lawmakers have, under the guise of fair majority-minority districts, drawn lines to squeeze all minorities into a few districts such that their voice collectively matters less as a facade to re-elect Republican state lawmakers to keep their political power. The intention of independent redistricting commissions is that they are independent and provide an alternative mechanism through which lines are drawn. Minority groups have been clamoring for change for centuries, but are held at the gunpoint of corruption as a facade of democracy. Change starts today with my amendment. Do not allow the gun to remain pointed at our democracy. Please pass my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Stum, for that speech at 3 minutes and 11 seconds. We're now going to be moving into 2 minutes of direct questioning. Since this is a first cycle speech, all questioners please rise. That first goes to Senator Rubis.
Why should a state lose all of their voting rights in Congress if they violate this legislation?
Because if they violate this legislation, they're choosing the voters, not the other way around.
But
So they
doesn't
don't
this
exist.
open up a precedent for small violations that were, it's not exactly perfect because an
Not a
entire
small
state is
I
disenfranchised?
would disagree with your assessment that this would count as a small violation. It'd be a violation of our Constitution as soon as this amendment is put into place, and the very cornerstone of our democracy. It's not a small
Right, but
violation.
just minor differences from the way this amendment describes it
Not-
could be misinterpreted.
Senator Raffinengo.
Currently, is racial gerrymandering against the Constitution?
It is so. Republican politicians, especially, try and create the facade of majority-minority districts to actually squeeze minorities.
Son, you're
into-
not answering my question. Is it against the Constitution?
It's supposed to be, but it isn't. Is your answer?
How is it not being enforced then? Because why wouldn't we have federal courts
I explained that in my
establish that this is a
evidence
problem?
at the end of my speech, where I explained that they're creating the facade of majority-minority.
If I can prove to you that racial
Actually,
gerrymandering worsens, will you vote in the negation?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill.
Hi, are randomly selected citizens qualified to draw districts?
So the way jury duty works is after there's a random selection, they are screened for conflicts of interest
but
and
why don't
potential
we-
disqualifications.
Why don't we start with Section B of your legislation that just has independent, nonpartisan people
Because
that are actually
the
qualified?
Brennan Center report I cited says that randomness is a key factor to the strength of IRCs.
But can't we look at these people that are qualified and then randomly select?
Citizens are far more qualified than politicians. That was the point of my first point.
It's not a politician, and it's an independent expert.
Thank
It's
you,
about
Senator Wang.
Hi, Senator. Bouncing off that previous line of questioning, your whole response is basically say, oh, look at what happens with jury duty, right? But which factor influences the political decision of citizens in jury duty?
So the amendment doesn't say you have to abide exactly by jury duty, just the process of random selection
Right.
and then screening for disqualifications. That's what my Brennan Center report says is the best
Right.
way to establish a strong IRC.
But fundamentally, citizens are also influenced by things like the media, right? Where in jury duty,
So are
they can make a
politicians.
decision before they even hear the evidence.
You have to look at the comparison.
Thank you, Senators. Questioning time has elapsed, and with that, I'm now going to recognize the first negative speech. Negative speakers, please rise. Right, the first negative speech goes to Senator Sanders.
I thank the chair that Senator Sanders, just like Bernie, you can see it on my sweatshirt. I'm speaking for the first time on legislative session, so I'll take silence as an indicator that everybody's ready, and if you're not ready, just unmute and let me know. For the presiding officer, parliamentarians, and judges reference, I will be timing myself on my phone, as a lot of people have been doing just for more accurate reference. And if there are no issues, I will begin on my first word. I remember when I was in school at recess, my friends and I would play pretend and draw lines in chalk on the concrete to divide our clans, factions, or groups for games of tag or imaginary games. But we would always end up forgetting about them and just doing whatever we wanted. But now let's bring this to the debate, which is a little more grown up. The lines drawn between Democrats, Republicans, and independents have crossed, as gerrymandering has reduced districting to child's play. But understand that it's because this bill is an equally naive approach to a solution that we need to fail. So today's legislation calls for randomization of elects to redistricting commissions. But let's take a closer look at the ambiguity of this language. So I took a look at the same exact Brennan Center report Senator Sun looked at, and it actually says that current state processes for choosing quote unquote random and nonpartisan commission members don't actually provide for any type of screening for bias, partisanship, or special interest that he champions, because people are not required by any word of law to actually put down any type of disqualifications, which creates the problem of a sort of lobbying of the redistricting commissions. A ProPublica investigation in 2011 found corporations, unions, and special interest groups bankrolling redistricting commissions because these commissions are allowed to make any sum of income and keep the sources quiet. And the impact of this is explained by a joint study conducted by Yale and UCLA in 2017, which found that maps made by IRCs are safer for incumbent re-election and consistent re-election than 75% of all simulated alternatives, resulting in district maps that are 76% less competitive than any possible alternatives. But let's step away from statistics for a second and let me give you an actual real example of this happening. The ProPublica investigation cited a commission called Fair Districts in Massachusetts. It had all the fair and correct numbers to protect communities of interest within the districting while keeping it fair and nonpartisan. However, the redistricting was still manipulated to the point where the chance of election of an actual representative of said communities of interest was little to none, because the commissions technically can't district on voting patterns, and it's these that would have determined the success of the representation of the intended group. So the overall harm we see of passing today's legislation is a manipulation of elections and silencing of critical groups simply becoming even more hidden and even more difficult to address when commissions with obscure interests can succumb to this form of lobbying while still technically following every written law about districting and still silencing the communities that need representation the most. Senator Sun, you won't be getting any more accountability or incentive from legislators, incumbents, or the people. You'll actually be getting less and reaffirming stagnant elections with gerrymandering that gets harder and harder to detect when all the numbers simply look correct. The change in favor of democracy you want simply won't happen when any change we see today will only bury the corruption you want to combat under more and more layers of obscurity, threatening the democracy we're meant to uphold. Understand, drawing districts isn't drawing divisions in chalk on the playground. It's time we grow up and realize our constituents' representation in this Congress won't be solved by this legislation. So our only option is Synegate.
Thank you, Senator Sanders, for that speech of 2 minutes and 59 seconds. With that, we'll be moving into 2 minutes of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. Right, the first questioning goes to Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so you described that a big problem with this is the possibility for lobbying of the people that are chosen for these commissions, right?
Yes.
How is that any different from politicians?
Okay, it's not necessarily any different from politicians, but you're creating a problem that's even more difficult to handle, right? So when all the districts are correct, but people are still drawing them to benefit their own interests,
so wait, I'm just confused.
Becomes even more deep-rooted and greater.
So if commissions or rather politicians are being lobbied to draw up commissions in a certain way, what is the difference with this legislation? Isn't it just
it becomes harder to actually change the
Thank you, Senator Mayer.
In favor of our constituents.
Senator Sanders, great speech. So under Section 3 of today's legislation, aren't there penalties that are going to be imposed on individuals or states that don't actually do this fairly?
Yeah, of course, but it gets harder to track those discrepancies when all the numbers literally look correct.
Sure, but generally speaking, if people are literally being disenfranchised to the massive
level, we won't be able to catch that disenfranchisement when on paper everything looks good. The reason we have this legislation is because right now the papers look bad, but when we pass, they change.
Thank you, Senator Sun.
Is it enough for the negative to bash citizens and redistricting experts versus actually comparing their incentives to politicians?
See, I understand that comparison of incentives, but what happens when you have people who aren't qualified necessarily to participate
Is
in
there a
politics
single
to that
part of your
extent?
speech that defended state politicians?
All right. What I'm saying is that these groups have a high tendency
So
to
we're-
get lobbied and paid off to
This debate's
draw
about-
districts that aren't fair for the constituents in the first place. You're
This
having
debate's not
constituents
just
draw
about
districts that
one
aren't
bad.
fair for themselves.
You have to compare the two, though. That's in order to fail the amendment, you have to compare.
Thank you, Senator O'Neill.
You talk about effectiveness, but in the jury system, are jury members taught how to fairly participate in the judicial system?
Sure, but this isn't a court case.
Okay, so won't this happen with the same system that this bill outlines?
Yeah, you can teach them to do their job correctly, but there is no guarantee that they will when they have the promise of payment under the table to draw districts that look correct but aren't.
Okay, but do you recognize the incentive versus politicians and random citizens?
I understand a difference in incentive, but we're going to see a worse outcome in the end.
Thank
But
you,
the systemic
senators.
change
Thank
is
you.
harder to track.
Thank you. And with that, we're now going to move in a speech in the affirmation. Affirmative speakers, please rise. First speech goes to Senator O'Neill.
I thank the chair for the judges. That is Senator O'Neill, O''Neill. And at your leisure, I'll go ahead and begin. I'm going to take a verbal indication as a sign that you're not ready since there are so many of you. So I'll give a couple seconds for that. But other than that, I'll go ahead and begin. Okay, perfect. Senators, the issue of gerrymandering has become such a prevalent issue that the absurd fight to create unrepresentative districts has led to the shapes of such districts being described as the praying mantis of Maryland's 3rd Congressional District, the earmuffs of Illinois' 4th Congressional District, and goofy kicking Donald Duck, aka Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District. Senators, it is time we allow our maps to take the shape of actual districts, not silly drawings. Affirm. But first, according to AP News, currently 21 of the US states have some form of nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting commissions. This proves that nonpartisan redistricting is feasible. Specifically, California and Michigan have an independent selection process that screens applicants not only for disqualifications or conflicts of interest, such as being a lobbyist, Senator Sanders, but that also makes qualitative assessments about the fitness of applicants to do the jobs. So, Senator Sanders, all of these requirements are outlined by this legislation, and they fall under the Brennan Center recommendations themselves, the same site that you cited. A 2018 report by the Nonpartisan Citizens Research Council of Michigan found that the state's election districts were highly gerrymandered, with district maps drawn so that Republicans were ensured disproportionate majorities. But their recent report found that the issue was significantly alleviated by their current nonpartisan commission. But if we want to solve the issue of gerrymandering on a national level, we, the Congress, have to be the ones to do it. You see, in 2019, the Supreme Court held that federal courts may not hear claims regarding gerrymandering because they represent a political question that is unsuited for resolution by the courts. Therefore, those districts being most targeted have nowhere else to go but to our legislation. So, Senator Sanders, look to why this legislation is so necessary. A 2019 Center for American Progress report found that unfairly drawn congressional districts shifted, on average, a whopping 59 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives during the 2012, 2014, and 2016 elections. That means that every other November, 59 politicians that would not have been elected based on a statewide voter support for their party won anyway because the lines were drawn in their favor. So Senator Sun touched on racial targeting, but let's expand this to the federal level. While gerrymandering is an issue abused by both sides, because Republican legislators hold state houses and senates in the majority of states, we have seen that the majority of gerrymandering falls to the aid of Republicans, affecting federal elections. A 2016 Pew Research Center report found that 33% of Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters are Hispanic or Black, while only 8% of Republican and Republican-leaning voters are. Thus, by increasing wasted Democratic votes, we are targeting already marginalized communities. But put the drawing paper back into the hands of the people, not compromised politicians. Affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Since this is a second cycle speech, we'll now be moving into 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. All right, that goes first to Senator Chandon.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. O'Neill. Great speech. So the affirmation gives us a lot of statistics about how state legislatures creating these districts is bad. Can you give me a single empiric proving that IRCs would do a better job at being politically neutral?
I gave you a state where it worked, Michigan.
Yeah, that was only on one state. Writ large, can you give me a statistic?
I wanted to give you a specific example, so I wasn't being so general. California and 20 other states have actually used these systems.
If the negation proves it's more biased, would you change your vote?
Thank you, Senator Torres.
Hi, Senator. So what kind of government does the United States have? A direct democracy or a representative democracy?
We have a representative democracy.
So shouldn't the job of drawing district lines be given to our elected politicians?
No, because they have an incentive to draw them in their favor. Therefore, it's
okay. So if you agree with this, shouldn't we change the Constitution to change our government system to be a direct democracy?
We're eliminating the democracy part of our representative democracy by allowing these politicians to draw districts.
Thank you, Senators. And with that, all negative speakers, please rise. All right, Senator Rubis, go ahead.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Joey Rubis, spelled R-U-B-A-S. So excited to be speaking for the first time in this round. Judges, just give me an indication when you're ready and we will get started. Perfect. I see 2. That's 3. 2 more. 4, 5. Perfect. That's all of you guys. Thank you so much. We'll get started. Sometimes I find myself thinking, what did it take our founding fathers to build the greatest nation this world has ever seen? Of course, they were smart, well-spoken, but above all, what I think set them apart was integrity, the moral compass to create a government that gave power to the people, not themselves. Today, we find ourselves sitting in a similar crossroads. Before us, we have an opportunity to grant ourselves immense power, unrivaled in the history of this country. Please, follow the integrity of our founding fathers. Negate. So far, I think my side has missed the mark. Senator Sanders, I agree that this bill is not the most effective way to solve for gerrymandering, but it's just silly to think that commissions aren't better than the status quo. Let me pick up where she dropped the ball and be the first person in this round to draw some common ground. I agree with Senator Sun. This bill will help gerrymandering. I'm negating for an entirely different reason. I'm voting against this legislation because it gives Congress the tools to abuse our power. That's all because of Section 3 of this legislation, which states that the punishment for being found to gerrymander is losing voting rights in the House and Senate entirely. Putting aside the brutal violation of all precedent that this entails, this is dangerous enough on its own. But it gets far worse when you ask, who decides if a state is in violation? Because the answer is this Congress. That's all because of Section 5, which the author of this legislation sloppily copy-pasted from other amendments. It reads that Congress can enforce this bill with appropriate legislation. In other amendments, the Supreme Court has already ruled that this gave Congress broad enforcement powers. In fact, in the Supreme Court case Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that Congress could pass broad legislation enforcing pieces of amendments and extending them to punish specific bodies. This legislation blows that power out of the water, prescribing that states should lose their right to vote. In essence, what this means is that this legislation gives Congress the power to kick other states out of Congress, and there's no check stopping them from doing so. This is a groundbreaking argument, Mr. Sun and Ms. O'Neill, because when you're worried about partisan powers manipulating the rules, this legislation gives this Congress the ability to disenfranchise millions with a single bill. But let's just take a look at the most likely way for this new, dangerous power to play out, where politicians stretch evidence to frame states for gerrymandering, disenfranchising millions for their political goals. And we've already seen this happen before, just earlier this month. Rachel Sheldon of the Washington Post explains on January 6th of 2021 that Ted Cruz and his colleagues voted to disenfranchise voters, despite nearly no evidence that Donald Trump truly won the election and there was voter fraud. This legislation just gives Congress more power to abuse, and that's something I can't stand for. In an age where rioters were just 6 feet away from putting members of this Congress 6 feet under, we are constantly reminded that our democracy is fragile and can never be taken for granted. So while I will always look to make our democracy better, I am never willing to risk putting it on the ropes. Today, I plead of you, Make your decision the same way our noble forefathers did 250 years ago. Put integrity first.
Thank you, Mr. Rubis, for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. That goes first to Senator Rodriguez. Correct me. I think Senator Pierre hasn't asked a question yet. Senator Pierre, you have the question.
Thank you. So how does Congress maintain accountability?
There's a lot of ways in the Constitution.
It's through voters, right? Like you can just vote someone out. So you concede that our bill would solve gerrymandering, right?
I think it improves it. I wouldn't go as far as to say it solves it.
So it improves it, meaning we get more people out to vote, right?
I don't necessarily think more people will get out to vote because
if you improve, if you mitigate gerrymandering, you're getting people out to vote because they're no longer squandered by district maps.
No, absolutely not.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, I feel like you kind of refute yourself in your own speech. Was Ted Cruz successful in his mission to actually reject these votes?
So in that situation, because of the Capitol riots, a lot of the people who were going to vote for it ended up voting against it.
Even with those votes, would they have been successful?
This power that they can abuse, we risk a future scenario where it gets abused, and that's incredibly dangerous.
Don't they already have the ability to do that with the Electoral College?
No, because the Electoral College—
Didn't they just try to do that?
It's completely different than a bill where you can—
Thank you, senators. Thank you, senators. With that, we're now in line for a speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Rodriguez.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Rodriguez. Rodriguez spelled R-O-D-R-I-G-U-E-Z. Whenever you're ready. Okay, is anyone not ready? All right, now I'll just begin. The most commonly cited reason for not voting in United States elections is the belief that your vote doesn't matter. And to be quite honest, that isn't far from the truth. Where we have politicians choosing who votes for them rather than the other way around, our democracy is at risk every single time we have an election, which is why it is imperative we bring fairness back to voting through the affirmation of today's amendment. Don't make the wrong decision. Now, it's become quite clear what the negatives advocacy has become. This idea that through hypothetical scenarios that simply will never happen, today's constitutional amendment is going to be disastrous for democracy. So let's respond to some of those arguments. First, begin with Senator Rubis, who just tells you that with today's legislation through Section 3, we're going to have congressional member after congressional member abuse this power and try to kick out voting members of Congress. A few responses to this. First, he refutes himself in his own speech by citing only one example of Ted Cruz and other members of Congress trying to carry this out in the past few weeks. Newsflash, Senator Rubis, they failed disastrously. In fact, the New York Times just a few weeks ago explains that as a result of this, their approval ratings of Ted Cruz and other senators who approved this insurrection have plummeted as a result. So, Senator Rubis, if you truly believe that politicians will try to do this, don't worry, they're going to get elected out of office. But second, the likelihood this actually happens is so minuscule considering the fact that the power of the Electoral College has allowed this to happen for decades and centuries, and the past few weeks is the first time it's happened in a long time. Don't worry, Senator Rubis, if you truly believe in democracy, you don't have to negate. But then Senator Sanders believes that through today's legislation, we're going to have so much lobbying in our citizens, despite the fact that she concedes this happens with politicians in the status quo. And despite the fact that numerous affirmative senators have already pointed out the jury selection process will solve for this. So even if you want to believe that, don't believe her evidence in which she cites completely hypothetical scenarios of redistricting commissions not doing a good job. Allow me to be the first actual person in this round to cite past precedent about how citizen commissions and independent commissions have actually worked. Kim Softon from the New York Times explains on July 1st of 2015 that when Arizona implemented an independent commission a few years ago, their elections became 28% more competitive. Yes, Senator Sanders, when we're both citing hypotheticals, we can say whatever number we want. But when we actually look at past precedent, we have seen nothing but success. But if you're a little worried about the citizen commissions and you don't really think that the average American has the ability to redraw districts, I believe the same thing at first. But then when you look at California, which implemented this back in 2013, Fair Vote reports that citizen redrawn commissions actually resulted in 14 incumbents losing their seat in the next election. Why? Because elections were at an all-time high for competitiveness. Past precedent has shown this constitutional amendment brings no harms, will bring democracy back to elections, and will finally give voters a reason to participate. Please affirm.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez, for that speech of 3 minutes and 14 seconds. With that, we're now moving into 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. All right, that goes first to Senator Sanders.
Okay, so we're both citing actual instances of past precedent. You cited an example of a state using commissions and it working. I cited an example of a state not using commissions and it not working.
So
how do you refute empirical evidence that shows that they make maps that are objectively less competitive 3 out of every 4 times?
Yeah, I have the same evidence on my doc. What it actually did was it compared 2 hypothetical districts drawn by both a state legislator and an independent commission, and they compared them. They didn't actually implement those commissions.
Okay, but if I'm citing an actual example of a state abusing this lobbying power in the—
Thank you, Senator Rubis.
2020 election, were there voters who believed in the conspiracy that Trump won the election?
I mean, there's only been one Trump, so I guess
yes,
not.
There were millions of them. So if a propaganda campaign like that is successful, and this bill empowers Congress, makes that power stronger, who's to say we don't risk that happening in the future?
I think we need to have a little more faith in American voters, considering the fact that they have largely had a lot of backlash against politicians that have tried to, disenfranchise millions of voters.
Why should we risk giving Congress this power?
Because I believe in American voters.
Thank you, senators. With that, we're now moving into a speech in the negative. All negative speakers, please rise. Okay, this goes to Senator Chandon.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. That's Senator Chandon, spelled Chandan. Super excited to speak for the first time in this legislative session. It's been a privilege. Any indication from my judges is great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And my PO is good? Awesome. Is anyone not ready? Perfect. America is set to be a remnant of a once powerful democracy. Partisan gerrymandering strangles the legislative process. Extremism grips elections and media alike. Progress has slowed to a standstill. But this legislation only takes that progress backwards. Treat this debate like an election between the affirmation and the negation. Because democracy demands our dedication, there's no choice but to fail. This election between these two sides has been contentious. So let's ask one simple question before we cast our ballots. Do IRCs work? The answer is they don't. Note that the affirmation will tell you that state legislatures are biased, but cannot provide a single empiric that proves that IRCs are politically neutral writ large. Our evidence that elections are 76% less competitive goes uncontested by the negation, but it goes even further than that. Pew Research Center finds in November of 2019 that in states like Arizona, California, and New York City, the state Senator Rodriguez states, IRCs ended up backing a single political party more than any lower chamber of any other state legislature in the country. That's not hypothetical, Senator Rodriguez. And Senator O'Neill, you told me that you'll switch your ballot if I prove on the whole that these commissions are biased. I look forward to seeing your affirmative vote. But finally, Senator Sun, if neither state legislatures or IRCs are effective, let me be the first individual to bring up a solution. It's mathematics. Fast Company writes in March of 2020 that political scientists from Harvard and Boston University are using sophisticated mapping algorithms to feed all of that census and geographic data into a neural network and letting an algorithm create those districts. We don't need people involved whatsoever. The burden of the affirmation now is to prove that their comparative is better than that. When it comes to ensuring equality, the impact is simple. When we overstep, someone gets crushed underfoot. But lucky enough, I also did my opposition research in preparation for this election. Next, fail this bill because it increases campaign spending, directly clashing with Senator O'Neill's argument about increased representation. Because when IRCs are less politically neutralized, this only increases the amount of money spent on campaigns. A separate report from the New York Times in October of 2017 finds that in the 2015 Federal Election Commission candidate filing for House elections, only 35 candidates had campaign funds exceeding $100,000. But in 2017, because of a result of more IRCs and other factors, 145 candidates had campaign funds exceeding $100,000. This correlation is inherent, and combining this impact with the impacts that senders on the affirmation have given you fundamentally outweighs any impact sender's son and the affirmation will try and tell you in the first place, because campaign spending makes politicians more beholden to their donors and reduces their loyalty to their citizens. That is what you weigh in this debate. The election between the affirmation and negation is over. But remember, there are hundreds of Caitlins, Andrews, and Gibersons, people who aren't in this round but are in the real world, voters who need our help, who I know are worth fighting for. But the question is, do you?
Thank you, Senator, for that speech at 3 minutes and 11 seconds. We'll now call upon 1 minute of direct questioning. Since everyone has participated, I'll stop looking away from the monitor for questions. All questioners, please rise. That goes to, this will go off of recency, so Senator Wang first.
Hi, Senator. Why haven't we seen that automated solution you provide be implemented in states?
It's still in the works. Those political scientists from Harvard and Boston just finished it.
Sure. So none of the states have tried that automated solution, right?
No, but I would argue mathematic things that take out bias are far more effective.
Sure. Mathematics, right? Who sets that formula that you talk about that determines the mapping?
A computer.
The computer can't do it themselves, right? There has to be some sort of human input.
Political scientists from Harvard and Boston.
How do you know that they're not politicized themselves?
I'd rather take them than independent commissions anyway.
Thank you, Senator Sun.
Off that previous line, algorithms can't be biased, is what you're insinuating?
I'm sure they can, but that's why they're taking the huge amount of steps to ensure that they're the most neutral.
Why aren't algorithms subject to the same biases that you claim citizens and experts would?
Like I explained, when you reduce it solely down to the neural networks between the census data and this algorithm, you're getting rid of any of that bias.
What do you need for a neural network?
Data from the Census Bureau.
Data, and then you need someone to code the algorithm.
Again, unless you can prove that data is going to be biased, I don't buy that.
Thank you, Senator. With that, we're now in a speech for affirmation. All affirmative speakers, please rise. All right, that goes to Senator Pierre.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Senator Pierre for the first time today on the affirmative. Any indication as to when you're ready, I'd be happy to begin. Cool. Is anyone not ready? Okay. All right, awesome. When the Bush-Gore election controversy first arose, America was in shock about how its founding principle, its mere democracy, could be at stake. Almost 2 decades later, voting and voter participation is of the utmost importance. But recognize that while America's perspectives, policies, and principles may have changed over the past 250 years, one promise has been ruined, that you will be represented through the power of your ballot. This legislation finally upholds that very principle. Principally, pass this legislation to reduce the commodification of minorities, both in elections and within districts. Let's build upon what Senator Sun told us from the very first speech. Currently, gerrymandering allows for candidates to ignore and completely distance themselves from the ideas and interests of groups. In fact, the University of Idaho in August of 2017 explains that on average, gerrymandering reduces turnout by 9.8%. But the result of this is the very disenfranchisement of interests and groups writ large. Even more than that, because minorities suffer from historical economic oppression, their ability to influence the state legislators who draw these very districts is slim to none, meaning that the interests that are represented in the vast majority of instances are from the rich and landed elite. This is quantified by the Washington Post, who writes in June of 2016 that minorities have to have between 45 to 45% of the vote for their candidate to win within their district. However, today's legislation radically stops this, as the historical benefits of IRCs, the very thing that this legislation is enacting, have helped combat the current issue of competitive disparities, and this will directly counteract Senator Chunden's argument as well. In fact, the New York Times explains in 2015 that in the state of California, independently drawn districts increased the number of elections won by less than a 5% margin by 200%. So, with more competitive elections, candidates will have to reach across the aisle and the demographics that are currently disenfranchised in the status quo, meaning that Senator Raffanego's concern that he raises during questioning doesn't materialize, and even further, Senator Rubis's concern about Congress abusing power is hypothetical at best, hyperbolic at worst. Second, This legislation reduces corporate influence. This is explained by the Economic Policy Institute in June of 2017, which explains that donations to state legislators double campaign amounts for incumbents, and they tend to win 80% of the time. But the reason why this is so harmful is because state legislators draw districts in the majority of states now. But today's legislation changes that, meaning that radical candidates will be unable to win because their elections will have electorates that are more fair, that are more moderate, and that are more reasonable. And Senator Chundin, in his evidence, said that there is necessarily a correlation, but then he simultaneously said that there are other factors within that very statistic that he cited, so he necessarily contradicted himself within there. But even further, this addressed what Senator Sanders said in her speech about lobbying, because in the negative world, politicians will always be beholden to their parties, thereby making her harm symmetrical, and in the affirmative world, they are no longer subject to the whims of partisanship that is ruining the legislative process as a whole. At the end of the day, while it took me 3 minutes to tell you the story, it took close to 300 years to make it. Pass this bill, because it takes one vote to end it.
Thank you, Senator Pierre, for that speech at 3 minutes and 12 seconds. We're now in line for 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. Between those standing, that first goes to Senator Shannon.
Thanks. If I'm a candidate in a competitive election, what am I going to do to try and increase my odds of winning?
You're going to have to reach out to other voters.
And increase your campaign funding, right?
But you're still reaching out to other voters.
Regardless, if you're increasing your campaign funding, who are you most loyal to?
Wait, no. Incumbents have the unfair advantage right now because you have to reach out to more people. When you get rid of gerrymandering, you have to spread out that base. That contradicts your entire argument.
You reach out to your same donors, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Raffinengo.
Even if you have the same donors, you have to reach out to more voters.
When we make like districting committees that are supposed to be independent, does that give a veil to racial gerrymandering?
So this argument I'm really confused by because there are standards in which and criteria in which these redistricting committees have to fall upon. So things such as the compactness.
But if there's extensional data that shows that this is notoriously biased and draws them in the ways that benefit their party the most.
When has it been biased?
Your California study even is biased. I just looked it up 5 seconds ago.
California will always vote Democratic. It is always Democratic.
It notoriously got worse.
Thank you, Senators.
That harm is like very
Time has elapsed. Thank you, Senators. All right, please respect the timing next time. All right, all negative speakers, please rise. Senator Mayer, you have the floor.
Thank the chair. For my judges and all the other representatives, that is Senator Mayer, spelled M-A-H-E-R, speaking for the first time in this legislative session. I'm always at your leisure, so any indication whenever you are ready would be phenomenal. Perfect. Awesome, thank you. Great. And I'll just assume that everyone is ready unless I hear otherwise. Okay. It's ironic how quickly this Congress pivots. After the 2016 elections, we were convinced that Russia was the greatest threat to our democracy. But today, to find the greatest threat, we just have to look in the mirror. Because in an attempt to remedy our own regulatory regressiveness, we've effectively paralyzed our populace. I want to ask two major questions encompassing what we've heard from both sides of today's debate thus far. First, does today's legislation effectively incentivize states to follow the regulations stipulated in Section 1? And secondly, does today's legislation effectively combat the issues of racism and inequality plaguing our current system? First, does today's legislation effectively incentivize states? All of Senator Sun and O'Neill's impacts about representation are all contingent upon states actually caring about these penalties laid out in Section 3. Now, Senator Rubis comes up here and tells you that it's principally abhorrent, and ultimately you'll see a lot of abuse coming out of here. But I want to make another argument. That's that small, polarized states won't comply, and their people will lose representation. Fox finds in June of 2018 that in states with 1 to 2 representatives, they know that in the grand scheme of things, their voices generally don't matter in a pool of 435 voting members. Historically, almost no vote has been split by 1 vote. Because of this, their state legislature is way more important in defining their policies because they have almost no voice on the federal level. But here's the biggest problem. A metadata analysis by the Journal of American Legislatures from May of 2018 found that these states with the least federal power are the most polarized politically, meaning that districting is super important to them winning elections. Let's break this down. If these states are the most polarized politically and don't care about their vote in the House, they just won't comply with this policy and will lose that vote to preserve that partisanship. meaning that when you pass this bill, their people lose all representation and their legislatures just stay polarized. It's a sad day for this country when the red, white, and blue is hijacked by red versus blue. Today's legislation eviscerates representation for millions. But secondly, does today's legislation effectively combat the issues of racism and inequality plaguing our current system? Senator Sun and Senator Pierre tell you about the racism that frequently accompanies gerrymandering. Senator Sanders and Senator Chandan on my own side tell you that IRCs holding biases can be manipulated negatively and that mathematically structuring districts based on population is much better. I want to distance myself from both of them. Ultimately, I think it's important commissioners take other factors like race into consideration in positive ways. Because a Loyola University Law School study finds in December 2018 that stretched out and strangely shaped districts are often used in gerrymandering. But in a lot of cases, they're actually used to support economic and racial voting blocs. For instance, back in 2015, when the proposed legislative map of Louisiana was split into 6 rectangular areas, when there was an attempt to implement a reform similar to the one Senator Sun champions under this bill, the map was heavily gerrymandered to favor Republicans and stifle the voices of minorities. Understand, the best way to solve for disparities and inequity isn't to close our eyes and have random citizens arbitrarily draw the lines. It's to have informed, nonpartisan individuals knowingly consider the racial and economic implications of the composition of districts. Today, you have to pivot to a more representative solution. Draw the line and negate.
Thank you, Senator Mayer, for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. We'll now move into 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. Just giving everyone a couple more seconds to raise their placards. And based on those standing, that goes first to Senator O'Neill.
Hi, Senator. So help me understand. Are you saying that small states and their constituents are going to give up their right to a voice in Congress in order to hold unfair elections? Yes. So unfortunately, that is what I'm saying, because what I'm telling you is that in states with like 1 to 2 representatives, their voice in the House, out of a House of 435, like 1 representative doesn't actually change much. Does the U.S. Senate have equal representation across all 50 states? I'm talking about the House more specifically. But this also includes the Senate. So why would they give up their seat in the Senate where they have an equal voice? Because under Section 3, it only.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez.
So if the entire purpose of having unfair district lines is to get a vote in the House of Representatives, why would they risk that?
Because ultimately, no, what I'm telling you is that ultimately their goal isn't just to get a voice in the House of Representatives. It's often to get a voice in like state legislatures and in district elections, meaning because that will actually be the area in which.
Who is usually the party leader, the one who goes to the House of Reps or to the state legislature?
I tell you that it's often very polarized, so ultimately they're going to
So those who go to the House of Reps don't have an influence.
Thank you, senators. All right, we're now in line for a speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. Again, all affirmative speakers, please rise. We still have 3 senators who have not spoken yet. It would be much preferable if we would have an even debate for at least 1 more cycle. That being said, I see no affirmative speeches, so I'm going to move into the negative speech. All negative speakers, please rise. All right, that goes to Senator Raffinengo.
I thank the chair. For my judges, that's Senator Raffinengo, Raffinengo. Whenever you're ready, I'll begin.
And then for the remaining 2 representatives or senators who have yet to spoken, it's always good to have some even-sided debate, so I suggest that one of you change your side to the affirmation. Thank you.
Are the judges ready? I can't see them because I have the presiding officer pinned.
Mr. Raffinengo, all the judges are ready. You're good to proceed.
Spectacular. I'll begin. After 16 years of being sworn onto the bench, Chief Justice Earl Warren, when asked the question, what was the most important case he had to ever rule on? For a justice whose history has so deeply changed America for more an equal and fair union, voting on Brown versus Board and Loving versus Virginia, he said that the most important case he had to ever decide was Baker v. Carr, a case to decide redistricting. And because Chief Justice Warren found that the question to be of utmost importance, this Congress should as well. Now let's look to the House of Justice and the Supreme Court and how they've ruled. First, throughout the history of gerrymandering, the Supreme Court has been the one to answer the constitutional question. The Supreme Court has time and time again talked that gerrymandering is simply impossible to have fairness in zoning and can't be agreed upon. Thus, politics will always have inequality. The American Bar Association, August 23rd, 2019 found When Congress exercised the power to end gerrymandering in the Apportionment Act of 1842, the Supreme Court ruled that it would simply be impossible to create a clear and manageable, as well as politically neutral test as a replacement for gerrymandering. But this isn't just a one singular case in 1842. The Supreme Court has ruled against it time and time again. In 2019, Rutgers v. Common Cause, they further supported that ruling that the court couldn't establish fairness when it came to a judicially manageable standard to gerrymandering. Not only is there no replacement method in the status quo that they believe possible, they believe gerrymandering to be constitutional. In the court case, Raspberry versus Sanders, Shaw versus Reno, and Beast versus Jalubiller, they all set the precedence that gerrymandering is both constitutional, but only the act of racial gerrymandering a violation of the Constitution. Not a singular affirmation impact by Senators O'Neill, Sun, Rodriguez, or Pierre stand when the legislation gets immediately struck down by the Supreme Court, since it's been ruled time and time again. But let's say that the Supreme Court does rule in this case. What happens? Gerrymandering continues. Currently, Senators Sun and O'Neill briefly discuss about state governments who attempted to use nonpartisan independent commissions, but failed to actually see what happened. Let's look at Senators Sun and O'Neill and Rodriguez are hiding. These nonpartisan redistricting committees were selected in the same way as Senator Sun explained to be fair. But as Senator Chandon on my own side would explain with a bunch of data, gerrymandering still occurs. But let me address that one instance that the affirmation has been championed by Senators Sun, O'Neill, and Pierre, California. ProPublica in 2011 found that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee paid off members of the IRC to ensure that they could gerrymander. So your highest point, they still were. It got worse. But let's look at what happens with the impact of when gerrymandering continues and we pass. The National Conference of State Legislators in 2019 found that independent zoning commissioners, when they racially gerrymander, now have the protection of the veil of a nonpartisan committee, making it difficult for the courts to prove injustice. So Senators Sun and Pierre, who advocate against racial gerrymandering, when you pass, racial gerrymandering gets worse. We fail to protect our constituency. We fail to protect this Constitution. I hold my vows deeply. Negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. With that, we're in line for 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. Between those standing, that first goes to Senator Mayer.
Senator Raffanengo, great speech. So you're concerned with basically this legislation being unconstitutional, right?
Of course.
Isn't today's legislation literally a constitutional amendment?
Of course, and it would go to the desk of the president, and then it would go to the Supreme Court, which time and time again has ruled this to be unconstitutional. Thus, it wouldn't go anywhere.
That's really not how our political system works. If this Congress votes to ultimately, by a 2/3 majority, amend the Constitution, we thus have an amendment to the Constitution.
It would still get ruled by the courts, and as I proved, it gets struck down every single time. It got struck down in 1842, and obviously you weren't paying attention to the speech.
But that was different legislation.
It wasn't. It was
Correction.
exactly the same.
Thank you. Correction, it's Mr. Pierre. Go ahead.
Thank you. What is the contiguity standard that IRCs use?
Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to pick independent committee members that are, picked out with data. Basically.
No, so basically you can't cross over different lines and you separate different communities, meaning that you directly stop gerrymandering because you can no longer
They don't. They just get Democrats to basically Democrats or Republicans to just gerrymander up for their own districts. It just gets worse.
IRCs have a contiguity standard which block that from happening.
They don't. We've already seen this in California. I've already proven it.
Thank you, Senators. With that question time has elapsed, all affirmative speakers, please rise. Again, thank you, Senator Torres, for flipping.
Hi, Senators. So this is Senator Torres. Just give me a moment to set up my timer, and then I'll be happy to begin, unless there are any instructions that say that we are not ready. With that, just give me a quick second, and I'll be happy to begin. All right. Widely considered to be the greatest American president of all time, Abraham Lincoln is famously quoted as saying, "The ballot is stronger than the bullet." Looking at Lincoln's life, this principle is undeniably true. The 1860 presidential ballot brought him to the national stage, and his subsequent re-election in 1864 allowed him to emancipate the enslaved population of the United States. While a bullet may have ended President Lincoln's life, unfortunately, don't let the bullet of the negation try and stop progress from being made into making America a greater democracy. First, allow me to contend the evidence brought by Senators Sanders and Chandon that independent voting commissions don't work. One study from September 2019, conducted by 2 professors in New York, analyzed 7 states who had commissions made for redistricting and compared the results to 10,000 computer-generated models. Out of the 4 regular commissions, 2 were biased, and out of the 3 independent commissions, 1 was biased. So ultimately, in the status quo, our system of independent redistricting commissions is only 33% biased, but normal state legislators are 50% biased. While Senator Rodriguez and my colleagues in the affirmation don't enjoy using hypotheticals, this real-life evidence shows how an alternative method using IRCs has proven in real life that regular commissions are simply too biased to be kept around. But next, today's legislation fights the ills of previous IRCs that have somewhat failed using the jury duty selection method. A ProPublica article from 2011 expressed how Democrats in California were able to manipulate the state's independent voting commission to draw districts that would favor their own party. So Senator O'Neill, your claim of screening in California is actually wrong. One woman purported to represent the Asian community of the San Gabriel Valley, but actually was a lobbyist who grew up in rural Idaho and lived in Sacramento. Just again this past year in California, the LA Times found there were no Hispanic members on the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, and whites were overrepresented. However, the positive impacts about today's legislation is that it makes up for what California did not have, and that's a jury selection way of choosing people to show up to create these IRCs. Ultimately, today's legislation fixes what California caused to be biased. But finally, this Congress has had a grave misrepresentation about American government that is fatal for future representation. Senator Sun, allow me to answer the question that Senator Sanders could not answer. The United States is not a direct democracy. Instead, we are a representative democracy, but a poor one at that. The beauty of our government is supported by Senator Pierre and my side. If people think gerrymandering is bad, then theoretically, these citizens would go to the ballots to get corrupt representatives out of office. However, this is problematic when our citizens have been showing up to the ballots at lower rates due to gerrymandering. Unfortunately, the elected representatives that we have within this room, such as the Honorable Senator Harrell and Representative Ash, should not be the ones drawing the lines. Because if we want a better democracy, it must be handled by our people. So let's affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 14 seconds. We're now moving into 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. This question first goes to Senator Sanders.
Okay, so do more or less states use IRCs right now?
Less than traditional methods of allowing politicians.
So in those few states, right, we've seen instances of corruption and misappropriation of the actual districting, right?
But as I provided in my speech, 50% of states
okay,
use
but I'm saying
traditional
we have
methods.
less states that use IRCs than states that don't. So when we start
Yes,
using
but in my
IRCs,
evidence,
doesn't
there's
that
more
impact
bias.
expand?
There's more bias in states who use traditional methods, allowing
We have
politicians.
literally less states to base this number off of.
Thank you, Senator Chandon.
Hi, just to clarify, that statistic you gave us about computer models being inaccurate came out in 2019?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, when were new algorithms created to make a more neutral process for algorithmic creation of districts?
Senator, I'm not saying that computer models are inaccurate. However, I'm saying that in the status quo, in existing states, independent commissions are less biased than ones controlled by politicians.
If we could prove that mathematic models are less biased than any IRC or state legislature, why are you passing this bill?
Thank you, Senator. I guess we'll never know the answer to that question. With that, all negative speakers, please rise. There should be only one. Senator Wang, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. That's Senator Wang, spelled W-A-N-G. Is anyone not ready? Okay, great. All of us have 2 things in common. We love our kids and we want to keep our jobs. But we shouldn't scribble on electoral maps like kids with crayons just to secure our job, because then we become the bully on the playground of democracy. Stop playing around. As the last speaker, there are 2 key questions in today's debate. 1, will the criteria for redistricting under Section 4 result in fair map drawings? And 2, can we ensure that our commissions are nonpartisan? The answer to both questions is a resounding no. First, negate because today's legislation freezes redistricting by creating a districting system dependent on legislature approval. Senator Sun argues that the aspect of randomness is enough to ensure that integrity is upheld because there's a process to prevent manipulation. Sorry to break it to you, but that false hope is masked by reality. Let's use his own framework of past precedent to contradict his work. AP News tells us on March 21st of 2019 that independent redistricting commissions were created in Ohio, Missouri, New York, Pennsylvania, and Utah. However, the state legislature still maintained power by being given the ability to reject the map as many times as they like. Senator Rodriguez and O'Neill both argue that nonpartisan efforts have succeeded in states so far, but legislative approval is not in violation of today's bill, meaning that we are indefinitely stalling out restricting, and realize why that has such dangerous consequences. Yale Law and Policy Review explains that because state legislatures are particularly hostile to redistricting reform, voter demands become increasingly unimportant, resulting in disillusionment in the democratic process entirely. Senator O'Neill and Pierre both advocate for minorities who they hope to empower under today's legislation by ending gerrymandering. But voters are still oppressed because map drawings don't change. And when voters feel that they don't matter, turnouts drop, engagement vanishes, and officials become the ruling class. But second, negate because today's legislation reinforces partisanship, by tasking the judicial system with determining nonpartisanship. Look to the New York Times, which tells us in September 16th, 2019, that the Supreme Court has decided that judges are above politics. Senator Rodriguez and the rest of the affirmation use the idea of nonpartisanship as a crutch, but from a constitutional precedent standpoint, the only logical reality is that the arbitrators of partisanship become judges, meaning that the entire system is fraudulent. The Center for American Progress explains on October 29th, 2020, that besides the Supreme Court and federal courts, state and local districts directly elect their judges for their respective region. Senator Sun and O'Neill both champion all the benefits of minimizing partisanship in drawing district lines to prevent minorities from being pushed to the side. But elected officials are still inserting their influence in today's proposed process that aims to reduce partisan actors, meaning that all those impacts are offset. When randomness turns into partisanship, accountability is systematically weakened on all levels. As our communities try to progress over time, our broken system is kept trapped at a standstill. I understand that gerrymandering can be confusing, but this legislation blurs the line between democracy and devastation, and there's nothing simpler than that.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. We're now going to move into 1 minute of direct questioning. Questioners, please rise. Between those standing, that first goes to Senator Torres.
Hi, Senator. So why should we trust our elected representatives in Congress more than judges?
We don't. That's the problem. The only reason, under your assumption, is that if we change map drawings, but state legislatures have power because they can reject any map until they get one that they like.
Exactly. But if representatives owe their allegiance to a political party, whereas judges remain independent, then shouldn't it be more up to judges to determine whether maps are gerrymandered?
Those people become the judges. That's how you determine nonpartisanship, right? The arbitrators of partisanship.
Thank you, Senator Sun.
Making the system.
Hi, what happens if state legislators refuse to approve this type of independent redistricting commission?
I mean, we punish them under the legislation.
We punish them. So why is that worth it for them? Why is the punishment worth it for them to freeze?
Because at the end of the day, they want to go ahead. Oh, at the end of the day, they want to secure their position and they do anything to get reelected.
They want seats at the federal level of our government, the Senate and House of Representatives.
They can't have a seat in the federal government if they're not even reelected in the first place. That's their priority.
Thank you, Senators. With that, seeing as time on this bill has indeed elapsed and everyone has gotten a chance to speak on this legislation, I'm automatically going to move to the previous question. With that, that'll automatically trigger Senator Sun's final appeal. Senator Sun, you have the floor.
Thanks. Second time today, SUN. Anyone not ready? All right, I think we're good. Awesome. NPO always ready. Just give me a few seconds. Okay. As soon as the negation started cherry-picking edge cases and trivial examples to justify inaction against the gun pointed at our democracy is the moment they lost today's debate. Look at the incentive structures of both politicians and citizens. You affirm my amendment. First question, is there anything uniquely bad about citizens or experts? Senator Sanders says it's lobbyists. A few responses. First, that sounds like an argument given by someone who's being lobbied. My point? Politicians are lobbied just as much, if not more. And two, the jury selection process under this amendment ensures disqualification for conflicts of interest. We give you the good citizenship incentive that I established in the sponsorship of today's debate that did not receive a single response from the negation. The only thing anything close to that was Senator Chandon giving you the alternative of neural networks, which, by the way, require human input and are just as bad as the citizens and experts that code those neural networks, if that's what he wants to advocate for. Our second question, is there anything bad about politicians? Here's where the negative really, really fails. When I asked Senator Sanders in cross-examination of a comparative in this debate, she didn't give an answer, and neither did the rest of the negation. The affirmative has given you structural incentives analysis as to how politicians' usual check on voters is abolished if voters can't choose politicians under gerrymandering. To all those on the negation, I beg you, don't be the reason the trigger is pulled on our democracy.
Thank you, Senator Sum, for that speech of 1 minute and 39 seconds. And with that, we're automatically going to move to the voting procedure on this legislation called a resolution to amend the Constitution to end partisan gerrymandering. That's legislative item docket 18. And for the Chamber's reference, like someone pointed out in cross-examination earlier, this is, after all, a constitutional amendment, so it'll actually require a 2/3 majority vote to pass. With that being said, all those wishing to pass this legislation, please raise your placard and keep them up until I tell you to put them down. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? Sorry, my Google Sheets is taking a little bit of time. All right, all those against? I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 votes against. Are there any abstentions? There should be none. Unfortunately, this legislation does not meet the 2/3 majority required to pass. My apologies to Senator Sun, your legislation did not pass. That being said, the chair would look favorably upon a motion to recess until the next half, I guess. Is there a motion at the time? Senator Rubis, go ahead.
Motion for a 5-minute recess until the next half.
I do believe Mr. Jacoby did say 20 minutes, so if you're amenable to 20 minutes.
I rescind my motion.
Go ahead. Okay. Is there Senator Shannon?
I'm going to move for a 20-minute recess.
All right. Are there any seconds? All right. Any objections to this motion? All right. Seeing none, we are technically in recess, but before we actually go into recess, I'd like to go over my quick spiel to end this first half. So thank you for electing me to serve as presiding officer in this first half. In this session, we got through 12 speeches and we got through 26 questions under my leadership, which is the maximum questions and speeches we could have gotten through. If you like my spreadsheet, which was lively updated with automated formulas, and my custom-made placards for this tournament, and how I ran a smooth and fair chamber, please consider ranking me accordingly in your rankings. Thank you so much, judges. That's Representative Beck once again. Thank you.
Okay, so we are standing in recess now for 20 minutes. So at 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll reconvene and conduct the election for the next presiding officer. This would be an opportunity if any of the judges have any questions to pose of me to ask. Otherwise, make sure, judges, that you get up and move around as much as the students should and stretch and take your eyes away from the strain of being on screen.
Just a question for Mr. Jacoby. Precedence and recency stay the same from this half of the session, right?
Correct, yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Adam?
Yes, hi.
Hi. We're supposed to rank these?
At the very end. So not now, but after the next segment.
Okay, so we get 2 sessions before we need to rank them. We take both of them into consideration. So we're
Correct,
looking
yeah.
for consistency.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think I forgot to put in some of my 1 through 6s. I really focused on comments, and I think I forgot the 1 through 6s. So I can just go through each name, right, and add those now.
Correct. Yep. The system's really nice and versatile that way.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for checking in on that.
Yep, that's it. One other question.
Yeah.
I ended up putting in 2 speeches for Son. Is that okay since he had the closing argument?
Oh, yes. In fact, that's what you should have done. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Kathy, I was going to say you would not recognize how things are being run at the General Assembly right now.
No, I'm sorry not to be there policy-wise, but in terms of the way it's functioning, it's just awful to watch from afar.
Yeah, I mean, I started off after I got, reelected, really wanting to work on building relationships across the aisle.
Right.
I put a lot of effort into that. And when I went back in June, the behavior was just so bad in terms of wearing masks and taking precautions that I couldn't have relationships with these people because they were putting my family in jeopardy.
I mean, yesterday we drove back down here, and it was fascinating to me because even on the highway, the behavior of some drivers is so much like rules don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Speed limit? Oh, I can go 110. And it's just this flagrant disregard for customs.
Yeah.
I mean, the General Assembly used to be a very comfortable place.
Right. And it's scary right now. It is literally scary.
Well, thank you for doing it.
Well, I'm going to carry out my duty, and I hope it gets better. It is better, actually. Everyone's wearing masks now.
Well, and everybody is being tested, and they're actually doing it, right?
Well, not everyone's doing it.
Somebody got kicked off the floor of the
house. Yes. Yes, but the speaker is
encouraging.
Yes, the speaker is taking it very seriously.
Well, it is very serious. I've had COVID. I understand how serious it is.
But I remember you had it. I was exposed during an in-person meeting Thursday, and the Senate chose not to tell me.
Oh.
They're not contact tracing.
Well, we're not going to stop it until that happens.
Well, the testing is helping. The testing is stopping because people test positive and they have to stay home.
Well, and vaccines may help.
And people over 65 in the legislature have had their first shot. So
I've had one.
Good.
Second one on Tuesday. But that's because I'm in Florida where they're a little bit more accessible.
And a little bit more organized.
Well, I think for the haves of the world.
Right. Yeah. You have to be technologically savvy to get a shot here.
Yep. Here too. Now, my score sheet's not going to look so technologically savvy. I can't figure out how to get back to somebody's speech after giving it.
So all you have to do is select them from the drop-down list. And then when you get to their page and their name is loaded, then you just scroll down on that page and you can see their earlier speech. Okay, and it is 5 p.m. Eastern time, so the chair will open the floor for nominations for the office of presiding officer. The chair recognizes Senator Mayer.
I move to nominate Senator Sanders.
I accept.
And you accept, okay, good. The chair recognizes Senator Torres.
I move to nominate Senator Raffanengo.
I humbly accept.
Okay, thank you, Raffanengo. And the chair recognizes Senator Rodriguez.
I move to close the floor for presiding officer nominations.
Is there a second? Senator Chandon. Okay. At this time, we will have candidacy speeches in order of nomination. So the chair recognizes Senator Sanders.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for nominating me. My name is Senator Sanders, just for your reference. For my experience, I have experience presiding on out-rounds in local, state, and national levels. So you guys might have seen me before, might have not seen me before. Just letting you guys know, I will be using the same exact electronic recency sheet as Senator Beck would be using in the case that you do elect me. And I want to keep the round just as short as sweet as my speech. So I see myself presiding the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And Senator Raffanengo.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first and foremost, congrats to everyone. This is seriously impressive to make it to finals at Emory. I'm Senator Rafanengo, and I'm looking to be your presiding officer. A bit about myself. Currently, I've been competing almost every single weekend on online tournaments and POing numerous rounds, racking up 170 hours of POing online experience. But not only do I bring the online experience, but also POing in general with 4 years of high-level debate, such as NSDA outrounds and TOC. Not only do I bring experience, but I understand how to operate the virtual setting, which is why I'll be using the Google Sheets as my colleague, as well as time-coded time cards with Emory seals on them. And if there's no problems with the judges, I'll allow you guys to time yourself with your phone, as it's the most sustainable way to keep yourself in check. I also have procedures in place for any tech issues that are bound to occur in an online setting so that we can move as quickly as possible if anything happens. I run for presiding officer because I feel there's no better duty to be able to run a chamber efficiently and allow everyone a fair and equal opportunity. Don't forego the best PO. Vote Rafanengo.
All right, thank you both. I am putting a straw poll for those of you legislators in the room to cast your ballots. I have to say, this is so much nicer than trying to unfold little pieces of paper that are microscopic in size. Okay, as the teller and tallier of the votes, it is my distinct pleasure to tell you we have a tie. So, and of course, the public servants on the call are like, well, of course, they're good candidates. So we'll give a brief opportunity for each of the candidates to give one more speech, and then we'll take another vote. So the floor is yours, Senator Sanders.
Hey everyone, thank you so much to everybody who did vote for me in the poll. Just want to reaffirm my experience presiding. I have been competing and presiding in national tournaments online for this entire school year, so there is a high chance that you have seen me before, especially at this tournament. So I'd really like everybody who didn't vote for me to reconsider their vote because I will bring the experience and speed that you need.
And once again, as I want to alliterate and put it to the table, I am efficient, so I'm not going to waste any more of your time. I already gave a speech. There's no need to waste any more of your time. You guys need this time for debating. Vote for Rafanengo if you think I'll be a good PO.
Okay, I'm gonna, since it was tied anyway, oh, it's not gonna let you do a second one. Okay, I'll do.
I think just briefly, Mr. Jacoby, if you hit back to poll, you actually can go back and revote, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, not with the settings that we have. There we go. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, we currently have 11 votes. And we have 12 votes, and we have a winner this time. Delegates of the chamber, let's congratulate Senator Rafanengo.
I want to thank everybody first and foremost for electing me in this position. It's a great honor to be your presiding officer. I just want to say that I'm going to have the exact same procedure as my predecessor. It's going to be 2-minute time placards, 2:30 at 2:30, and at 2:55 at 2:55. And then for direct questioning, I'll give you a 10 at 10 seconds remaining, and then a stop at 30 seconds. And then I'll immediately move on to the next questioner. In picking speakers, I'm going to use the recency that's carried over because it does carry over. So I'll just be using the one from my predecessor. If there's any other questions, I'm going to be using basically the exact same rules and procedures as my last PO. So I don't want to waste any more time in this round. At this time, I'm going to send my PO information sheet so that everyone can have access to that. Just let me know if that works for everybody. Can I get just an identification if it works, the link? Okay, awesome. With that being said, we'll move to the next piece of legislation titled India. Do we have a sponsorship present? For those who have risen, that'll go to Senator O'Neill.
I thank the chair. For the judges, that is Senator O'Neill speaking for the second time this legislative session and probably the last, unfortunately, at this tournament. So, oh, actually, that's not true. I'll be coming back and making my appeal speech. But any indication that you're not ready would be great since there are so many of you.
For everybody, the PO is always ready. So when the judges are ready, just feel free to begin. Senator Rubis, is that a motion or a...
Point of order, my name is missing from your speech recency chart. Can you check that against Mr. Bakes real quick?
Oh, let me just double check that. My apologies.
Yeah, point of order, if it helps you, I think Senator Rubis.
Senator Rubis still wouldn't have recency. I'm looking at just where I fill in the flow.
I was just pointing it out.
Oh, okay. I'll fix it during this speech. For sure.
Okay, great.
Any other problems? All right, Senator O'Neill, go for it.
All right, perfect. And I'm just gonna pull out my clock. Great, okay. I'm just gonna say it. China is a great artist. Their grand mosaic of manipulation is the best in the game. A trade deal here, military equipment there, infrastructure aid over there. They have their hands in everything. Senators, I no longer want us to be part of that grand mosaic. Let's halt their imperialistic tendencies and create an economic environment where we no longer rely on them. Affirm my legislation. But first, you passed today's legislation because Chinese interference is a great geopolitical threat to the United States. According to Crisis Group, China's infrastructure program to help Pakistan, CPEC, is being used to exploit Pakistan's conflict with India in Kashmir in order to maintain dominance in the region over India. Beijing has expanded its influence in South Asia with broader conflicts such as their encroachment on the South China Sea stemming from this regional insecurity. The farther China encroaches in the region, the more violent conflict will happen in that very region, as we have seen developing in Taiwan. Reuters stated in 2019, India purchased Russia's S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, with Russia conveying to New Delhi that if it doesn't maintain its military relationship, Moscow is more than happy to sell more arms to Pakistan instead. Let's move in now before our ally India becomes reliant on Russia. Senators, let us use our military aid as leverage to halt Muslim practices within India, something we are unable to do in China. Saudi Arabia's diminishing fortunes shows that a sufficiently poor human rights record can eventually destabilize even an alliance with tens of billions of dollars of defense contract. But that brings me to my second point. Let's look at the issue that has been greatly marked by this pandemic and everyone in this chamber should acknowledge. American businesses are looking to move out of China and into India. American companies have indicated their desire to move out of China, and this process has been strengthened after COVID-19. The pandemic exposed over-reliance on Chinese imports, and businesses are looking to diversify their links. According to the Economic Times, the government of Japan is even going to pay its companies to leave China for this very reason. India has pushed forward several initiatives to boost manufacturing. According to Bloomberg News, India looks to offer tax exemptions up to 10 years to any companies that establish new factories in labor-intensive areas. If these proposals and ordinance actualize, they would provide the ease of business, tax incentives, and labor market reforms that both domestic and foreign companies have been seeking from New Delhi for years. These are important new ties we can form to no longer rely on China and take away the very leverage power they have been using on the United States for years. Senators, let's remove ourselves from that mosaic. It is not a beautiful piece of art. It is a global catastrophe. Affirm.
The judges' speech time, 3 minutes, 1 second. All questioners rise. Senator Rubis.
Hi, Senator. So Section 2.2 of this bill says these funds are helping India fight against India or Pakistani and Chinese influence. Isn't that a dangerous precedent that risks causing military conflict?
Well, what happened is when we give our military aid to India, we're ensuring that our ties are their main source of military aid, not Russia and the other countries that these countries are turning to.
But why should we be fueling conflict with more weapons in the region?
We're not necessarily fueling conflict by giving them military aid. While I understand that that military aid is going to be used, it doesn't necessarily heighten what's already happening. It's just ensuring that they turn to us rather than countries like Russia.
Senator Bake.
China.
So hi, you don't want other countries turning to Russia for aid, right?
Of course, rather than us turn to us.
Right. So what happens to Pakistan when we cut off their aid?
Well, what happens to Pakistan is that they have to inevitably turn to Russia, which they're already...
Exactly. So do we want other countries turning to Russia? You just told me you don't want that to happen. So then why are you passing this legislation?
Status quo. Right now, we have ties to India that we can maintain. If Pakistan's already turning, we might as well keep our relationship with one country that's doing the exact same.
Senator Mayor.
Making that worse if you pass?
Decorum. Senator Mayor.
Senator O'Neill, great speech. So I want to talk a little bit about the US businesses moving out of China that you talk about. If they're already doing this in the status quo, and if India is already increasing their manufacturing initiatives, why does that change whatsoever under today's legislation?
Not happening in the status quo, as I just stated. It's happening after the pandemic. They haven't actually started these initiatives in China. They said they're going to if US companies show interest. And through this legislation, we'll be ensuring that we can...
You already said that US companies have an incentive after the pandemic.
Senator Torres.
Hi, Senator. So Section 1 of today's bill says that any funding that will be given to India will be taken from military aid given to Pakistan. Are you aware of how military aid to Pakistan has been affected recently? How has our aid to Pakistan been reduced recently?
Well, it's been reduced by the millions, as we've seen in the past.
Exactly, over 80%. So how would today's legislation actually create change if we're severely decreasing the amount we give?
Affirmation, because we're not actually fueling...
Senators, the questioning time has elapsed. Next speakers rise. I'll give it a second. That goes to Senator Rubis.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Senator Joey Rubis, spelled R-U-B-A-S. Excited to be giving the first negation speech on this piece of legislation. If my judges could just give me an indication if you're not ready to make things a little bit easier, that would be great. And then in a few seconds, we'll get started. Perfect. No one's not ready? Okay, wonderful. We can get started then. Thank you guys so much. Every single hour, 43 people across the world die in war zones. That's over 60 civilians since the start of this session, over 30,000 since the start of this year. After decades of the United States trying to be the peacemaker of the world, still, war prevails. So while our foreign policy will continue to make change that lasts for lifetimes, we only have 60 minutes to come to a conclusion. Don't waste any second of it. Fail this legislation. Let's start the clock. Fail this legislation to prevent further conflict escalation. I want to remind this Congress that this is the fourth war that Pakistan and India have fought against each other. And remember, Pakistan has lost the last 3 wars and is currently losing this one right now. Foreign Policy magazine reports on March 21st of 2019 that it is incredibly unlikely for Pakistan to get aggressive in their conflict with India and China, because despite having a substantial military, they absolutely can't win against the massive militaries of China and India anytime soon. One of the worst things we could do in our foreign policy is take military resources from someone defending themselves and give it to the aggressor. But that's exactly what this legislation does. Because, as the New York Times elaborates in June of 2020, India is building its offensive military abilities, not just to flex their muscles on Pakistan, but they've done this dozens of times in the past 80 years, making an attack every time and killing hundreds of innocent civilians. Pakistan may be matching India, but their attacks aren't having the same outcome. I would even argue that because of Pakistan's economic instability, India is more likely to strike now when the iron is hot. Furthermore, removing military defense from Pakistan gives India even more incentive to get aggressive. Analytic expert Mike Tuskisky from Stephen F. Austin University's International Relations Commons finds in a 2020 meta-analysis that the reason Pakistan has such a large arsenal but isn't willing to use it is because disarmament makes the country perceived as less strong than its allies and more vulnerable to its enemies. But why is this important? Because creating a stronger India and a more vulnerable Pakistan means even more lives are lost. Senator O'Neill, we are on the same page here. I want to take action against China's expansion in the region, but I will never do so if it risks putting civilians in the crossfire. But finally, understand the impact. The Global Political Review found in a report updated in 2020 that if India and Pakistan that if the United States gives aid to either India or Pakistan at higher levels, the conflict could escalate to a larger military conflict, possibly costing the lives of thousands of innocent civilians. We are the military that takes a side when you pass. I can never stand for that. It's easy to talk about foreign policy in theory and hypotheticals, but the 60 minutes we've spent debating this bill will make lifetimes of difference for people in the region. So in my 3 minutes coming to the close, it's now your time to decide.
For the judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 5 seconds. Questioners rise. That'll go to Senator Wang first.
Hi, Senator. What is the militaristic relationship between India and the US?
We've been giving them a small amount of aid, but in general, we're relatively impartial when it comes to the India-Pakistan conflict.
Well, we share military logistics with the targeted goal of deterring China, right? What past precedents shows that Pakistan has the same mindset?
You tell me.
There is none. Pakistan doesn't have that same goal. They've been working with China to bolster their own economy.
I'm arguing that while combating Chinese expansion is good, what's more important is protecting civilians in the region.
But either way, if you want to protect
Senator Pierre.
Thank you. Your entire case is built on the assumption that you're just protecting civilians on your side, right?
Right.
But the conflict will still continue regardless of whether we pass or fail.
Yes, but I gave you a
if that's true,
plethora of evidence of how this legislation.
If that's true, then your harm about lives being lost is symmetrical. It happens in either world. Why should you not?
Because there's an element of magnitude.
Wait, you just said
on
that
my side, India is empowered to be more aggressive and they're more effective in that.
The
fight.
Department of State has recognized
Senator
Pakistan
O'Neill.
as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Senator O'Neill, decorum.
Hi, Senator. So how much is China giving Pakistan in aid under the status quo?
You tell me.
$6 billion. But under this legislation, we'll be giving India $1 billion. So how does your contention still stand that Pakistan doesn't have the means to defend themselves?
Once again, I think that we need to be making sure we're putting civilians first in this debate. With this legislation, you take aid away from the vulnerable one and give it to the one who's creating the attacks. Even if it's less aid than China's providing, that still puts civilians.
Thank you, Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so is the conflict India versus Pakistan or India versus Pakistan and China?
It's a whole web of conflict, absolutely. But specifically,
didn't Senator O'Neill just tell us that China and Pakistan are working together?
Yes, but once again, I don't think we should prioritize shrinking Chinese expansion.
Wait, so how is Pakistan the vulnerable one if they're working with the global superpower China?
Because they are the one with the smallest military of the three powers in the region.
How is China's military looking?
China's military is massive.
Thank you, Senators. The questioning time has elapsed. Affirmation speakers rise. Senator Rodriguez, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone, for the second and presumably final time in the session. That's Christian Rodriguez. Whenever you're ready. Okay. Are any of my judges not ready? Awesome. Then I'll get started. During World War I, the United States didn't get involved until German submarines were found inside United States territory. In World War II, the United States didn't get involved until Japanese ships bombed Pearl Harbor. So I ask all of you, what will it take for you to get involved in World War III? because it seems as of right now, China and India are at the brink of all-out conflict. And I ask all of you, get involved before the war even starts by passing today's legislation. So far in this round, we've had a bit of a mischaracterization of what's going on in the conflict between India and China. So allow me to clarify. The BBC explains on January 25th of 2019 that as of right now, China and India are fighting over the same territory called the line of actual control, which has gotten so heated that back in June, 20 Indian troops were killed by Chinese forces after an altercation. But here's the thing, Senator Rubus, Pakistan isn't just a helpless victim in this conflict. They are directly working with China. In fact, the South China Morning Post reports earlier today that they're actually working on building military infrastructure to work together and defeat India. So this idea that India is the one that is abusing Pakistan couldn't be farther from the truth. But let's understand just how vulnerable India is right now. Susan Singh from Foreign Policy Magazine explains on January 1st of 2020 that China's military budget is 6 times larger than India's, has 1.5 times more military personnel than India, and has far superior technology. If anything happens in terms of all-out conflict, India is bound to lose. Take that into consideration when you also look at the fact that both China and Pakistan have hundreds of nuclear weapons, and any form of war will be disastrous. But I want to show you why the negation is flat out wrong when telling you that this legislation will only provoke conflict. Allow me to show you 3 reasons as to why this legislation is the only option for deterring violence. First, look at Pakistani military aid. With this legislation, we redistribute it from Pakistan to India, providing 2 forms of solvency. First, the US Department of Defense explains that since 2015, we have given over $1 billion in military assistance to Pakistan. If Pakistan wants it back, which don't worry, they absolutely do, they're going to have to comply with us and their relations with China and make sure they don't fight against India. Second, the fact that Pakistan is receiving military aid from us right now directly hurts India. Giving it to India makes sure the victim in this situation isn't at risk. Third, US intervention ensures that we deter any form of Chinese conflict, because Michael Berkeley from the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University explains in 2017, Chinese military plans in terms of any war involved getting involved in a conflict, overwhelming their victim, ensuring that the United States cannot get involved. We preempt that through today's legislation, and we make sure World War III never comes to fruition. Please affirm.
The judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. All questioners rise. Now go to Senator Torres.
Hi, Senator, would you agree that China has been trying to establish instability and undermine the Pakistani state?
I don't think so, considering the source I cited earlier says they're actually working very closely together.
Well, considering the China-Pakistan economic corridor, do you think China is trying to spread its government's influence to try and undermine Pakistan?
Well, I mean, you could make the argument that's their strategy for any country, but the fact of the matter is they're trying to maybe destabilize Pakistan. They're trying to destroy India.
But maybe it's possible that they're using military aid as a means of coercing them, correct?
I highly
Senator Rubus.
Section 2.2 of this legislation explicitly states that we're giving this aid to help India fight against Pakistan and China. Even if Pakistan has a strong military, does this not empower India to fight against them militarily?
Well, the fact of the matter is India is already being attacked by both China and Pakistan. This legislation allows them to actually have an option when that isn't like completely getting destroyed.
Why is more warfare ever the best thing?
I mean, the fact of the matter is we're
already... Senators, the questioning time has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Now go to Senator Beck.
Hi everyone, this is Senator Beck speaking for the first and probably only time in this legislative session. I was the presiding officer last time. Of course, thank you to Senator Raffanengo for taking over my job from before. And as always, I'd love any indication from all my judges when they're ready. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, we'll just get started then. Pio, you're always ready? Awesome. For centuries, American foreign policy interests have spanned every corner of the globe, from the oil fields of the Middle East to the battlefields of Europe. Yet, wait. Sorry, that's my dog. Could I restart? Sorry, my dog's been like really loud.
Is the parley okay with that?
Yeah, my dog was scratching on my door. I'm really sorry about that.
I'd need confirmation from the parley. I'm just going to assume it's okay, since it was only 10 seconds in.
Sorry about that.
Restart.
Thank you. For centuries, American foreign policy interests have spanned every corner of the globe, from the oil fields of the Middle East to the battlefields of Europe. Yet, when American aid is the only thing stopping innocent blood from flowing through the rivers of the Himalayan region, you affirm this legislation. First, let's actually understand how the US aid is keeping peace in the region. Contrary to what Representative O'Neill tells you, Pakistan hasn't fully gone to Russia. We actually still give aid to Pakistan. According to Vox in September 2018, since 2002, the United States has given Pakistan over $14 billion in aid to combat terrorism and insurgents in the region. But we also provide aid to India. In fact, the State Department in January 20th of this year quantifies this, telling us that we gave $20 billion in total defense trade to India last year. The beauty of our policy in this conflict is that we provide aid to both sides, India and Pakistan, which gives us a very crucial role of a mediator, since we hold a significant leverage over each country, India and Pakistan, in terms of aid. Because of this, we can directly see that their actions have the correlations with the funds we give them. Because of that, we've been able to maintain some level of peace and stability in the area with our leverage. But here's why this legislation actually dramatically worsens this conflict. Because look to Section 1 of this legislation, where we completely cut off aid to Pakistan, making it so that they will turn to Russia. It's not really hard to see why Pakistan will turn to Russia. In fact, let's turn to past precedent. According to the Financial Times in January 2018, after the US suspended aid to Pakistan over its inefficiencies when it came to dealing with the Taliban, Pakistan deepened its relationships with Russia, and because the US suspended $2 billion in military aid to Pakistan. Mr. Rodriguez, they actually didn't come back to us begging for more aid. They actually went to Russia instead. But the Institute for Strategic Studies, Islamabad, in 2018 actually tells us the direct impact of this, because the presence of our aid is the only thing in the status quo stopping Pakistan from fully turning to Russia. But when we take this aid completely away from Pakistan, that's so bad, because we leave them with an ally that's entirely hell-bent on killing more lives. The Carnegie Endowment in April 2019 explains that Russia's foreign policy objective is expanding its hegemony by building up two sides of a war to destroy both sides and reach their untapped resources. The path to their goal literally requires exacerbating violent military conflicts. That means that when Pakistan turns to Russia under today's legislation, Russia will do what it wants to do, ultimately create more conflict and more casualties. Russia has shown such a lack of responsibility when it comes to casualties, it's gone as far to kill 544 civilians in airstrikes in Syria and 130 children. Senator O'Neill, human life is the most important impact under today's legislation. I will never sacrifice human life over abstract concepts of geopolitical influence. This Congress can climb slopes higher than the Himalayas only if it put its mind to it. It's easy to discuss these numbers, but harder to look at an innocent Indian and Pakistani mother in the eye and tell her why her child had to die. Negate.
Thank you, Senator. Speech time, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. All questioners rise. That'll go first to Senator Chand, or sorry, I thought that was Senator Chandan. He had it up for a second and it glitched. No, that'll go to Senator Pierre.
Thank you. So both sides can agree that conflict is occurring right now, right?
Conflict is occurring right now, yes.
Considering that's true, lives will be lost regardless. Why should you support Pakistan and continue to embolden them?
Like I told you, when we cut off aid to Pakistan, they're going to turn to Russia. Russia is entirely hell-bent on creating as many...
said it's already happening.
Like I told you, our aid is the only... Our current maintaining of aid is the only thing stopping them from completely
they already turned to Russia and China, and we give them aid now.
No, you misunderstood. We're still giving them some level of aid, right? But it's not to the point where it's complete full dependency.
Senator Sun, decorum.
To what extent does Pakistan rely on China right now?
You can tell me, but I know based on the previous speeches that it's there to a certain extent.
Yeah, very, very dependent on China. That is putting them in a debt trap of military dependence. How does passing or failing this legislation change that reality?
Like I told you, it's not just China we're dealing with here, it's also Russia. When we pass today's legislation, Pakistan is going to turn to Russia even more.
What is stopping Pakistan from currently turning to Russia?
Like I told you, our aid, the presence of our aid is the only thing that's
President Trump has displayed 4
Thank
years.
you, Senator. The question time has elapsed.
Motion?
Affirmation speakers rise. State that.
In order to search for some common ground as part of the legislative process, I'd like to move to approach the chair with an amendment.
The chair grants that. Send it over. Just send it in the chat. I guess in the general checks. I don't think you can privately message me, and then I'll also send it to the parliamentarian as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Is there any other motions? All right. Seeing none. Affirmation speakers rise. That will go to Senator Torres.
I thank the chair, that's Senator Torres. If it helps, I spoke second to last on the last piece of legislation. I've been raising my placard on both sides to try and avoid the flipping fiasco that we had last time. So I'll just take any sign that, any auditive sign that you are not ready to prevent me from beginning, but it seems like we're ready to go. U.S. foreign policy can be likened to a double-edged sword. On one hand, we have the power to strike down those who spread violence and terror among society abroad. However, this great global hegemony also gives our nation the ability to promote chaos and guerrilla warfare, only perpetuating conflict. In South and East Asia, the poor international policies of both Pakistan and China pose a threat to United States interests, thus necessitating greater partnership with our ally in India. Let's affirm. First, we need to see that India has been instrumental in the past protection of sovereignty for island nations in the South China Sea. An article published by the New York Times on December 17, 2019, found that, quote, both the United States and India oppose China's military moves in the South China Sea and what experts describe as its intimidation of India, Japan, and smaller states in Asia. What is happening is that China is using military force to try and extort concessions from its neighbors, which poses an international threat to peace and security for these small island nations within the Pacific. Additionally, China has built multiple islands in this area in order to build military bases that are causing severe damage to coral reefs, which must be stopped. An estimated 100 million people in the region depend on this fish for food and income. In the case that the United States needs to take action on China, it is extremely key that India be on our side as opposed to China's. Senator Rubis, allowing China to damage coral reefs is going to endanger more lives than the unlikely conflict that would come in an affirmative world. And Senator Beck, the harm of threatening food sources for hundreds of millions far outweighs the Russians, and they're not even 700 casualties, making it the biggest impact in today's debate. But next, we need to see that defense cooperation has been a key part of U.S.-Indian relations, which must be maintained. Randall Shriver, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, said that the U.S. and India have made great strides over the past 3 years, syncing lines of communication, holding annual amphibious military exercises, and increasing arms sales to India. Quote, the two countries have together spent about $18 billion in security cooperation, starting from basically zero in 2002. Without any defense cooperation in the region, India faces threats from their eastern neighbors in both Pakistan and China. To conserve this relationship, defined by mutual economic and military security, we must affirm. But finally, actions undertaken by the Trump administration have negatively impacted our relations with Pakistan. BBC News on January 4th, 2018, found that the US government cut almost all security aid to Pakistan, saying it has failed to deal with terrorist networks operating on its soil. The State Department said it would freeze hundreds of millions of dollars in aid given to Pakistan unless they were able to effectively deal with the terrorists. In the status quo, President Trump was unwilling to help Pakistan, and President Biden has also been critical of him. Let's put our money where it will be actually used, which is in the country of India. And let's use our sword of foreign policy and global hegemony to actually save lives in the South China Sea. So let's affirm.
The judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 7 seconds. All questioners rise. That go to Senator Beck.
Hi, so you're concerned about lives, right?
Yeah.
Who does Pakistan turn to when we cut off all their aid?
They turn to China, who's given them dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars.
But they also turn to Russia, right? Does Russia care about human rights?
Russia doesn't care about human rights, but neither does China, as I've proven.
Right.
They're threatening hundreds of millions of lives.
Either way, we're creating more casualties,
yes,
right?
but you need to look at magnitude. I said that 100 million people are threatened. You said only 700 casualties have been caused by
I don't
Russia.
understand that because you're still fighting in the same area. Like the same number of people are under threat.
I understand, but you need to weigh 100 million over 700.
We're weighing the same thing then because we're in the same region of conflict. 100.
Not exactly. You're focusing on Russia, I'm on China.
Okay, so I have a question. What should we prioritize more? Chinese interregional conflict that exists whether or not we pass, or a direct conflict that we can either pump money into or not under this legislation.
I disagree with the premise of your question. I believe you can stop this Chinese intra-regional conflict if we give military aid to India.
What does that have anything to do with us funding a direct border conflict under this legislation?
Yes, it does, because as I've proven, our military relations with India make it instrumental in trying to stop China's abuses
Okay, but
in the
this is
region.
for the purpose of a border conflict. I don't understand what relation this has.
Well, if you can't draw the correlation between our 20 years of military compliance with India, then
Thank you, Senators. The
might as well
questioning
not vote.
time has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Negation speakers rise. Senator Sanders.
All right, hey everyone, that's Senator Sanders speaking for the second time this session and most likely the last, going a little earlier than expected, but once again, I will take silence as an indication that everybody's ready and just unmute to let me know if you're not. And once again, I will be timing myself. Just like for ease of keeping track of it. So I'll begin on my first word. Sorry, just setting up my timer really quickly. The United States seems to always be in a race among other world powers to see who can intervene in the next foreign conflict first. The justification seems to be that the US help is a faster and smarter way to counter problems to bring unstable regions closer than ever to the finish lines of their conflicts. But this rationale has caused America to historically cross the line, pushing finish lines out of sight. Today, passing won't serve to help India counter China like the name of this bill suggests. It'll just run any resolution out of the foreseeable future. So stand with me to negate. So Senator Rubis begins by establishing the fact that executing the transition of aid outlined in today's bill is only going to escalate the conflict. But let's extend this to see what it means. Bill negation Senators Rubis and Bay couldn't establish a uniqueness of this impact to the side of negation that Senator Pierre kept asking for and questioning. So let me provide this. We looked at the South China Morning Post, which today, like as we speak, reported that China is developing land routes with Pakistan to border the interoperability of their militaries in encroaching on border conflict with India, which is the exact infrastructure Senator Rodriguez on the affirmation cites. He cites this as a reason why we need to bring in support to India, but here's what everyone is missing. We looked at Reuters, which explains that India and Pakistan have completely rejected any efforts of mediation or resolution of the conflict to date. And India has been buying billions of dollars of United States weapons and defensive systems just last year at the same exact time of rejecting any offer of mediation. So the nations are preparing for a future in conflict without the United States. The difference is when we pass, we facilitate this conflict not by evening out the balance of power, but by incentivizing an even greater rise in tensions. So I want to distance myself from my fellow negation speaker, Senator Beck, when he says that we have leverage to use as a mediator, because that's simply not true, which directly connects to when Senators Torres and O'Neill bring up Chinese manipulation of their allies. This literally can't get any worse than it already is in the status quo, because as it stands right now, we literally have no say in this conflict other than how many dollars we pump into it. So what we see when we pass is the US pulling the strings of the conflict through potential death tolls instead of diplomacy when we weaponize and disarm India and Pakistan respectively. Senator Beck terminalizes this impact when he explains a nearly definite future of exacerbated foreign influence on the conflict. So when we pass, what happens is that we simply give both nations the executive freedom to perpetuate a proliferation of firepower, abuses, and conflict, because no parties want us there in the first place. Without any effort for mediation, conflict is inevitable, and we can't be complicit in that death toll. Today, our intervention simply isn't justified. Don't cross the line, don't pass, and keep the end to this fight in our line of sight. Negate.
For the judges, that's a speech time of 2 minutes and 32 seconds. At this time, all questioners, please rise. That will go first to Senator Shandon.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Sanders. Great speech. Simple question. Is the purpose of this bill defense or deterrence?
Well, as of right now, it's defense.
Right. So if we're defending them from actually taking on any more military operations, doesn't that pave the way for negotiations?
No, because we're literally just, under the legislation, we're still literally just giving them money and putting a tagline of defense on it. We have no way of knowing what they're going to use the money for.
Are we giving them money or intelligence? It doesn't stipulate money anywhere in the bill. It
Look,
says,
if we're giving them military aid in the first place, they're going to be using it
O'Neill.
for conflict, regardless of what it is.
Okay, so when those negotiations you cited were taking place, were we funding both India and Pakistan?
I'm saying no negotiations are taking place.
Okay, but the ones that you say were rejected, were we funding both?
I'm sure you can tell me.
Okay,
Because as of right now, we give aid to Pakistan and India at the same time either way.
Don't us pulling out aid from Pakistan and giving it to India show that we are committed to helping them and further our
Literally, neither parties want us there. They just want us for our money. That's it.
Wasn't that while we were funding both nations and not showing any commitment to either side?
I'm literally saying that
Thank you,
can't act
senators.
as a mediator regardless.
Thank you, senators. Both the parliamentarian and I both agree that the amendment is germane. The amendment states, once again, it will replace the word fight in section 202 to defend. If you want to move towards debate on the amendment, we need a 1/3 majority or 4 senators. So with that, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your placard.
Point of order. Wouldn't it be all those in favor of moving to open
To the debate for the amendment, yes. I count 1, 2, 3. That's not enough, sadly. This bill or this debate on the amendment does fail, and thus we'll move on without the amendment. All those at this time in the affirmation, please rise. That'll go to Senator Sun.
Senator Sun, third time today, once again on the affirmative. SUN. If anyone's not ready, let me know. Otherwise, I'll get started in a few seconds. In the chess game of foreign policy, the United States always seems to think of itself as the king of the board. But we haven't always lived up to our position, especially when it comes to the conflict with India, China, and Pakistan. I'm asking you to have the courage to avoid imminent defeat and take the strategic risk that ensures our victory. For this speech, I want to spend the entire 3 minutes responding to negative arguments that this legislation exacerbates conflict. First, my general response is that none of these arguments have any impact if they concede that inaction also leads to conflict. The Eurasian Review explains in September that despite disengagement talks at the highest level between both India and China, both countries are increasing troop counts at the border and their divisive rhetoric, suggesting that war is imminent, if not inevitable, because it shows bad faith in current negotiations between India and China. India right now is in a compromising position at the board, and it is only today's legislation that has any chance. Because second, let's talk about Pakistan. Senator Beck tells you that this bill causes Pakistan to turn to Russia. We've already proven to you on the affirmative that Pakistan is already entirely dependent on China, who is just as irresponsible as Russia, meaning we have no chance of salvaging our relationship with Pakistan. Why is this important for India? I now want to respond to the claim from Senator Rubas that this bill empowers India. This is absolutely false. Inaction is what is making India more aggressive in the status quo. The Prince says in July that India does not have a complete military safety net from any country in the world, including the United States. What has been the result? Paul Staniland explains in December 2019 that in order to play at the chessboard of global politics, India feels like it needs to take more aggressive risks with regards to military intervention, exactly what resulted in airstrikes against Pakistan. How does this bill solve it? It reassures Modi of our unconditional support. Take a look at the language of Section 1. It provides uncapped military aid and locks our legislative stance to be pro-India and pro-deterrence against the expansion of both Pakistan and China, ridding them of the incentive for India to go on the offensive. There are two impacts here. First, it decreases Indian aggression, but second, it ensures deterrence against China. The Greater Pacific Capital explains in 2017 that India alone has the scope and scale to offer an alternative to China's leadership bids across Asia as a whole. A war will happen if you negate today's legislation, putting India on a compromising position at the board as pawns to the regime of both Pakistan and China. Pass today's legislation. It's our only chance to prevent conflict. One word's all I have for China, Pakistan, and the negation at the end of today's debate. Checkmate.
The judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 6 seconds. All questioners rise. That'll go to Senator Bake.
Hi, Senator Sun. Great speech. So, how actually likely is it that India and China go to war with each other?
So the very first thing I said is that if we do nothing, India and China are locked into an
Yeah, wait. So
irreplaceable.
I don't buy that, because aren't they like literally the world's greatest economies? Like, you really think they're gonna go clashing with each other?
India and China have a nationalistic conflict over the line of control that borders the two countries.
Yeah, and have there been any shots fired?
And
have there been any shots?
History.
Yeah, have there been any shots fired there in the
Thank you,
border?
Senator Sanders.
I'm sorry. Point of inquiry. I believe that goes to Senator Mayer.
Did Senator Mayer raise it last second?
I believe so.
Senator Mayer.
Hi, Senator Sun. Great speech. So ultimately, what's happening right now between India and China?
Tensions up.
Right now, as of last week, they've been having bilateral negotiations for the first time in months.
I told you that even despite bilateral negotiations, they are still increasing troop counts and rhetoric, which suggests that war is imminent, if not inevitable.
What was the result of those negotiations as of this past week?
None of the talk between China and India is ever going to yield a resolution if there is an inherent territorial dispute between the two.
Thank you, Senators. The question time has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Senator Mayer.
I thank the chair. For my judges, that is Senator Mayer, spelled M-A-H-E-R, speaking for the second time in today's legislative session. I'm always at your leisure, so any indication when you're ready would be phenomenal. If you just give me 1 second, my paper fell. Okay. All right. Assuming everyone is ready. Believe it or not, China just opened its first ever Monopoly board game theme park, which is really ironic because the game Monopoly seems to be really similar to China and Pakistan's grapple for monopoly over India. But it's also eerily similar to our reactive foreign policy, in that it's seemingly up to chance and going around in circles, kind of like today's debate. But it's time to stop rolling the dice on foreign policy, but rather time to start investing in pragmatism instead of property. Because unless you fail, we're going to dismantle regional security, and we're not getting another get-out-of-jail-free card. I want to ask the biggest question in today's debate, which is which side best promotes regional stability. Senator O'Neill champions the affirmations advocacy, arguing that Chinese expansion is drastic and needs to be countered. Senator Rodriguez and Torres tell you that China's military can overwhelm India's. This is basically the primary argument that we get out of the affirmation. And historically, I don't disagree. But here's the problem. By passing this legislation immediately, as per Section 5, you undercut the positive negotiations occurring right now. I urge my fellow senators to turn on the news. Because this week, while scrutinizing this piece of legislation closely, I've been keeping a close eye on India and Pakistan's current relations. Seems no one else has done this. Because the Indian Times writes last Sunday night that China and India just finished their 9th round of talks. Both countries agreed that said talks have enhanced mutual trust and understanding, with both countries willing to maintain the good momentum of dialogue and negotiation, end quote. As of Sunday night, the results of said talks were still classified. Obviously, I didn't pay much attention to it, similarly to Senator Sun, who tells you all talk and no action. But Monday morning, it was a whole different story. Because then, I read a memo from Indian delegation leader, Lieutenant General P.G.K. Menon, who actually literally headed up the negotiations and reported to Al Jazeera that both of the two sides agreed for an early disengagement of the frontline troops, as well as achieving the settlement of numerous outstanding issues regarding militarization and troop withdrawal, which remain classified. Ultimately, over the course of the next few weeks, their troops are going to disengage. Understand that until we know the result of these talks, and until we've given both sides time to fulfill their side of the agreement, we have to wait. Senator Sun tells you that inaction is the worst thing. No, right now it is the only responsible thing. Because when Senator Sanders on my own side tells you this conflict can't get any worse, I tell you it absolutely can. When the United States ignorantly intervenes, you prolong conflict by eradicating any chance of bilateral peace. Fellow legislators, we cannot debate in a vacuum. Stop giving pre-prepared speeches and start paying attention. Then, Senator Torres tells you that the actions taken by the Trump and Biden administration have harmed our relationship with Pakistan. Use his own analysis against him. This legislation is the only chance we have to prevent them from turning to Russia, as Senator Baig tells you they're already doing in the status quo. When you pass this bill, you further infuriate Pakistan, turn them directly to Russia. That's even worse, especially given that this is already preventable. with rights and security at stake. We can't afford to play games with our partnership with India. Failing is a huge win for our foreign policy. In fact, it's the only win you have in this game.
The judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 8 seconds. Questioners rise. That will go first to Senator Wang.
Hi, Senator. Even if deterrence through negotiations is so likely, why would that combat China's long-term incentives for aggression?
I think A, because China already agreed that they were going to remove troops from the front line where the conflict is the worst.
They say a lot of things.
Right, okay, but if they're already being able to come to conciliatory negotiations, why don't we let these play out? Future negotiations will
Logically, right? China has always wanted to increase the regional power. How does negotiations take that incentive away? I don't think that's
Senator O'Neill.
debate on logic, but now it's actually happening.
Point of inquiry, did Senator O'Neill get the question over me when she questioned Senator Sanders?
Yeah, she has 4 questions, and this would be her 5th question, and she has the first pick on 4 question blocks.
Then why is she at the top of the recency of the 4 questions if she had 3 questions the time before?
Because she asked the 4th question. Now
So she would have been at the bottom of the 4 questions, and I would have this question recency.
No, right? No, I think there's an error here, but it's Senator O'Neill.
Oh.
It's Senator O'Neill because I'm writing it on paper too, so it's Senator O'Neill. I'll fix it on my sheet.
Okay. Hi, Senator. Okay, I gotta just pull myself back in. So has India and China negotiated peace in the past?
No, this is actually one of the first times that they've actually been able to come to an agreement, which is what makes this agreement so incredibly paramount.
In June of last year, they had the same sort of negotiation. So who's to say that this is actually going to work if they've proven that it's not going, that they haven't in the past?
I'd argue that this time, because both sides have suffered tremendous losses due to these border skirmishes, they actually have a unique incentive to follow through. Both sides have lost and had tremendous catastrophes through deaths.
What about this time makes it unique?
Look, even in your best case scenario, I still say that we give it a little while rather than hastily enacting legislation that has the potential to prolong conflict.
Okay, so the questioning time has elapsed. Affirmative speakers rise.
I just want to clarify point of inquiry. So if she had the questioning recency, then why did she go from the top of question 4 to the bottom of question 4?
Yeah, what happened is I meant to type it in question 3 on the bottom, and I mistyped it into the question 4 like top slot because I had it empty.
So the question would have gone to me in that situation then?
No, it would have still gone to O'Neill. She had 3 questions.
Then why did she get the question before me then?
It was misplaced. I meant to put it in the question 3 when she asked the second question.
Okay, I apologize.
Totally, it's all my fault too. I have it on paper as well, so that's my fault. Senator Chandon.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. That's Senator Chandon, Chandan, speaking for the second time and final time in this debate, and for the final time in my congressional debate career. Really quickly, I just wanted to thank my parents, my coaches, and my friends for making this possible. Any indication from the judges would be great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah? Thank you. Everyone deserves justice. Unfortunately, for the Kashmiri people, the Pakistani children, the Indian families, brutal conflicts have defined their history for the past decades, and it always comes clawing back. Throughout this round, the affirmation and negation have taken us on a trip through the Middle East. At the end of this round, I want to take us on a different trip, a trip through time. As I speak, remember justice, because it is not just our problem, it is our promise to push for peace. First, let's time travel to the short-term future and answer the question, how does this bill mitigate conflict in Kashmir? What concerns have we heard from the negation on the 2 tactics this legislation utilizes? First, in terms of mitigating and halting military aid to Pakistan, 2 layers of warranting prove why this action is effective. First, Senator Baik and Mayer on the other side tell us that Russia and China are already helping Pakistan. They literally prove the affirmation's point. No foreign actors are going to take the United States' place upon passage. Any harm they give you is symmetric at best. But Ahmed Wahid for the Journal of Asian Security and International Affairs puts the nail in the coffin in April of 2017 when he explains that the small amount of dependency Pakistan does have on the US is for military aid, for important American-made equipment, things like AH-1Z helicopters and special operations equipment. That's the leverage you get when you pass today's legislation. Second, providing military aid to India for the sole purpose of deterrence, like I questioned Ms. Sanders on. I find it funny that Senator Rubis and Senator Sanders, the negation on the whole, wants to fearmonger with rhetoric about the US providing fighter jets or nuclear missiles. The Observer Research Foundation quantifies in July of 2020 that regardless of US-India engagement, American support will always mostly come in the form of continued intelligence. Let me make it clear, the debate does not matter about whether or not we agree with Indian action right now, but the necessary comparative that we have to issue is how we can make human rights better in the future. Because strategy is always better than strength, this legislation is one we have to pass. But hop back aboard my time machine. Let's go deeper in the future. How does this legislation impact geopolitical tensions on the whole? Pass this bill to decrease transnational terrorism efforts. The only person who talked about this whatsoever is Senator Mayer, who tells us that we should wait until these bilateral negotiations go through. But she doesn't take into account the leverage that this bill gives us that I just proved to you, because decreasing aid forces them to listen. Why is this important? In decreasing the Taliban foothold in places in Pakistan. The LA Times tells us in February of 2017, when they quantify that in areas that were controlled by the Taliban, there were 61% increases in civilian casualties and 25% increases in child deaths. Lives aren't lost in these rounds, but in reality. This is the round-winning impact of this debate because it prevents rockets from dictating our dockets. I started this speech by talking about the crossroads of injustice, but for the past 7 years in my time in Congress, I have stood for the vulnerable, stood up for the little guy, stood up for what's right. It has been the greatest honor and privilege to serve in this chamber. So for the final time ever, I am so proud to affirm.
The judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 2 seconds. All questioners rise. Senator Sanders.
Okay, so a lot of your speech is focused on the fact that US aid is about deterrence, right?
Yes.
How is it about deterrence if literally last year we signed several billion-dollar contracts for attack helicopters and air weapon defense systems?
Like I explained, any future aid that we give them comes in the form of intelligence.
Why?
Because the legislation stipulates that it's for deterrence against Chinese and
It
Pakistan.
doesn't, though. It never doesn't say that anywhere in the legislation. It says to fight against.
If you read Section 2B, fight against and defend against is the same concept. It's deterrence.
All right, but how does that exclude any possibility of conflict? I don't understand.
As I explained, any future
Senator Bake.
intelligence.
Wait, so hi, Senator. So you told us that we're going to gain leverage over Pakistan in terms of fighter jets, but if Pakistan turns to other countries when we halt military aid, why is there new leverage?
No, you and Miss Mayer already explained that they're already looking to those other countries. That doesn't change when you pass today's
No,
bill.
because like you told us, they're still dependent on us to some degree, aren't they?
Yeah, so at your highest
Exactly.
rate, it gives us the leverage that we need in negotiating.
Why is there going to be leverage when they're going to turn to another country?
They're paying other countries for it. We're giving it to them for free. That's the leverage we
What?
get.
No, they're getting aid from
Thank you,
these other
Senator.
countries.
The questioning time has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Negation speakers rise. Seeing no negation speakers, affirmative speakers rise. Now go to Senator Pierre.
Motion, voice begins.
State that.
Point of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you. Just like Senator Chandan, for the final time ever, that's Senator Pierre. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. It's been an honor to compete with everyone. Won't get emotional. Any sign of life, any indication, be happy to begin. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Perfect. Since the ruins of the fatal Indo-Pakistani War in 1947, conflict and bloodshed have been made synonymous with both nations' histories. In ancient times, conflict was ridden with governments who ruthlessly worked in order to gain influence. Fast forward, and immoral actors from ancient history are continuing to wrongfully dictate the region's present. Pass today's legislation so it doesn't forge their future. For this speech, I'm going to delve into one clash point on regional stability. I want to make something abundantly clear that necessarily changes this debate. Regardless of whether we pass or fail, Chinese escalation and expansion will continue in the region. And this is the case because A, China's economic incentives with their Belt and Road Initiative, which they've extended with Pakistan, and B, the military ties that they have, considering that Pakistan gave China full access and control of the Gwadar port, which gave them access to critical oil supply routes. In fact, Senator Sanders' own example about China escalating today only proves that they will not stop. But notice how Pakistan continues to expand as well. The Economic Times explains on April 27th of 2020 that Pakistan's military expenditure rose by 70% over the past decade. What this means in this debate is that it is inherently comparative in nature. Considering that they show no signs of slowing down, we should evaluate this round on who best achieves the prospects of peace and stability. With that said, there are two reasons why the affirmative has won this. Firstly, by improving India's military capability, which is something that's largely been overlooked in the context of this debate. Business Insider on December 22nd of 2020 explained that last October, we had the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement with India, which gave access to topographical, nautical, and aeronautical data and allows the United States to provide advanced navigational aids to India's military, thereby improving all of their operations. This means that Senator Rubis's argument is flipped because if Pakistan is working with one of the global hegemons in the world, they are not the ones that are in most need of our help. Secondly, this takes the negation at their best. Even if our aid isn't effective, there has been no contestation that halting aid to Pakistan won't weaken their ability to escalate. But for the second part of my speech, I'm going to compare the arguments of both sides and show you how even if all the negations arguments are true, you still vote to pass this bill. On Senator Beck's argument about moving over to Russia, even if this happens, note that the only impact that he gave you was in regards to human rights. But literally, Pakistan is aligned with China right now, who also has no regard for human rights whatsoever. They're inherently an authoritarian state, so that link completely collapses. On Senator Rubis's argument about conflict escalation, not only did he not necessarily give a link to more conflict occurring, but even if it happens, weigh the long-term impact of combating Pakistan's sphere of influence within the region. Even further, Senator Sun proved to you how inaction costs lives as well, and even further, Senator Chandan just proved to you how Pakistan has supported terrorist organizations in the region. If there's anything I want to leave behind, it's that hypocrisy has become the de facto policy of the United States. But for every single time we speak up about any single issue in any debate, we have to recognize that every single time we speak loudly, who are we truly speaking for?
For the judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 6 seconds. Questioners rise. That will go to Senator Rubis.
Hi, Senator. So this legislation gives weapons to India and tells them to use them to fight. How is that not a link into more conflict?
Your side also conceded that like China is escalating right now. It's comparative in nature. China will continue to abuse them if we don't support them whatsoever. Even if we do lead to escalation, we still combat Pakistan's sphere of influence. Your side is not contested why that's a bad thing.
Why should we ever support a piece of legislation that gives arms to a region in conflict and says,
wait, right now we're literally funding a state sponsor of terrorism. That's not just either. I'd rather support India.
Torres.
Hi, Senator. So I'm on your side, but I wanted to touch on a point regarding terrorism within Pakistan.
Sure.
So recently, the Trump administration cut defense funding to Pakistan. Do you think that's the right way to counter this terrorism?
Well, we've given them aid under the guise that they would work to combat terrorism, but it didn't work. I think we should halt all funding and redirect it as what this legislation stipulates.
And could you tell me how India would do a better job combating this terrorism with this new aid that we'd be giving?
Well, they work oppositional to regions like the Taliban and things such as Afghanistan, which is something that Pakistan doesn't necessarily do. So I think that's...
Senators, the questioning time has elapsed. Negation speakers rise. Affirmative speakers rise. Senator Wang.
Hi, everyone. That's Senator Wang closing out today's debate. Is anyone not ready? Okay, great. In the disputed region of Kashmir, gunfire is overwhelmingly common, burning up not just diplomacy, but seemingly our devotion to democracy as well. You see, now as this Congress finally feels the heat of the conflict, I fear it has rushed to rise from its ashes. Don't allow sparks of fear to ignite a problem we can't extinguish. Let's break down this debate into two priorities: geopolitical stability and protecting civilians by upholding human rights. The AF wins both. The most important fact is that if we want to counter Chinese aggression, we can't support Pakistan while they work with China with the goal of hindering US initiatives with India. The most crucial link is between Pakistan having aid and US operations being weakened. The Borgen Project explains in December of 2017 that with increased infrastructure and military development through aid, Pakistan becomes a stronger, more stable regional and economic actor, giving it the ability to suppress India's government. But then, Senator Beck argues that leverage over both countries gives us an effective role as a mediator. We can't see success with Pakistan standing over our shoulder. But that's problematic because our ties with India facilitates our China containment strategy. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute reports in 2018 that US defense companies, including Lockheed Martin and Boeing, are becoming more dominant in the Indian market. India and the US agreed to share military logistics to counter the growing maritime assertiveness of China. Senator Sanders, if India doesn't want the US to be part of the conflict, then why are we sharing military logistics? Senator Beck, India is a relationship worth saving. Why? Because quite simply, under today's legislation, we strengthen India's ability to further Western strategies, bolstering our plan to counter China and ultimately securing the US geopolitical posture in the Western Pacific. But the other category of neg arguments left relatively uncontested regards civilians. So second, affirms to halt attacks on vulnerable civilians in the region by strengthening India's military oversight. Both Senator Rubas and Senator Beck's greatest impact is human lives, but that's why you affirm. The Human Rights Watch reports in July of 2020 that 195 million Muslims reside inside India. But mobs are responsible for recent Muslim killings in India that have taken the lives of innocent civilians and families. Senator Maher, military aid to India will help subdue this violence that currently plagues civilians. But then two things can happen. Either killing stop or the violence continues. If the latter occurs, then we know that it is the Indian government continuing the cycle of abuse. And that is still a step towards peace, because now the international community can hold their government accountable on the international scale. According to the United Nations in October of 2017, the international community is serious about holding governments responsible for international crimes. But that is easier to do when the government is directly responsible for the atrocities and the issue is brought to the international level. By affirming, human rights are upheld, dignity is restored, and a vital population is protected long-term. Senator Maher, no matter what China says about negotiations, nothing will change their mindset of regional dominance. Recognize the inherent harm before smoke suffocates progress.
For judges, speech time, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, 2 seconds. All questioners rise. Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so why is the solution to stopping these mobs that are occurring among the Muslim population to give India military assistance?
Because, well, it brings it to the international scale, right? Two things can happen. Either violence decreases because once you have more military presence and you strengthen their military, they have more oversight.
Why wouldn't that antagonize mobs?
Because they're on opposite sides. You're deterring their aggression.
Yeah, wouldn't having military assistance on the opposite side of these mobs antagonize them?
You're not militarizing the mobs, though. Like,
but this is military aid, is it not?
Senator Sun.
Increasing the mobs are becoming more violent.
This bill dedicates military aid to countering Pakistan and China. How would India use that aid to subdue mobs against Muslims?
Okay, simple logistic chain goes like this. Pakistan is strengthened by our aid. Pakistan's regional growth hurts India's influence. India is crucial to our China containment strategy.
No, but how does that have anything to do with countering mobs?
Because it's fundamentally easier to do when we bring them to the international scale.
But this bill specifically says to counter the expansion of India or for Pakistan and China. I don't understand how that has anything to do with
exactly. You're by increasing the.
Thank you, Senators. The questioning time has elapsed. The chair is looking for a motion. Senator Mayer.
Being that all speakers have given 2 speeches or have spoken on this piece of legislation, I move to the previous question.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. All those in favor? Seeing a vast majority, I'll move to the previous question, triggering the final appeal. Senator O'Neill, you have the floor.
I thank the chair, that's Senator O'Neill, and I just want to start off by saying I'm so honored to be the final speaker at this prestigious debate, and I'm so honored to have competed with all these phenomenal speakers, so thank you, everyone. And on that, any verbal indication that you're not ready would be great. I'll give a couple seconds for that, but other than that, I'll go ahead and begin. Senators, I'm disappointed to see that members of this Congress would rather be paint on canvas than the artists themselves. However, I am not willing to submit to this. So let's pick apart the negations arguments and understand why they are the ones ultimately spilling red paint. Senator Rubis comes up here and tells you that it is unlikely for Pakistan to be aggressive because they cannot defend themselves, but this is simply not true. As I stated, Pakistan is expected to receive $6 billion from China. Senator Rodriguez further further this by outlining Pakistani aggressions by the numbers and by outlining the superior size of China's military compared to India. Their only refutation comes from Senator Meher, who says they're settling peace right now. However, in June of last year, India and China agreed to peacefully settle their border tensions. Obviously, they don't stay true to their word. Big talks about aid, but what he fails to recognize is that actual congressional oversight has been phasing it out, decreasing it by nearly 50%, as the AF has pointed out. So Senator Big is wrong. Playing both sides has not been effective in compromising and lowering violence. Senator Sanders points to rejected negotiations, but understand that when these negotiations were taking place, the US was funding both sides. As Senator Shandan perfectly disputes, by showing full commitment to one side, we hold more leverage than in insecure negotiations felt by India. Senator Sun pointed out India's military security has actually increased military aggression, completely refuting the negation's claims. Senators, put the paintbrush back into American hands. Affirm.
The judges, speech time, 1 minute, 30 seconds exactly. At this time, we'll move to the previous question. All those in favor, please raise your placard at this time. I count 1 Taurus, Sun 2, Shandon 3, Rodriguez 4, Wang 5, Pierre 6, and O'Neill 7. All those opposing, please raise your placards at this time. Senator Mayer, Senator Bach, Senator Rubis, Senator Sanders. On a vote of 7-4, this bill does pass. Congratulations to the sponsor. At this time, seeing that we've exhausted our agenda, I'd move for orders of the day. Is there anything the judge or the parliamentarians want to say at this time before we all adjourn?
As always, with the Barclay Forum, an excellent final exhibition round. To those of you who this is your last time, congratulations. If our country ever needed dedicated and committed and compassionate public servants, we need them now. And you represent those qualities and those characteristics to the utmost. Congratulations. It's been a wonderful way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, I'll just echo those comments. Having served in Congress, I would say that all of you are much better than the average member of Congress. Your arguments were coherent and cogent. I liked your professionalism. It was a privilege to spend the afternoon with you this afternoon and evaluate your talents. Thank you very much.
I'll certainly add my thanks for being able to be a part of this process, and what an impressive group I've had the privilege of listening to this afternoon, and I agree you are so well prepared with data and statistics and making arguments for and against, and your analyses were inspiring. And so I agree. I hope that you all will continue to use your talents and your skills in a positive way and work for the betterment and contribute to our country as this leads to whatever next steps that you all may pursue in the future. So thank you again.
I would love to follow your steps in the future because they are going really great places. Thank you for letting me be a part of learning about what congressional debate is all about and recognizing that the next generation of legislators is sitting right here in these chat rooms. Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Senator Sally Harrell. I've never done this before, although I still haven't really done it because we did it by Zoom instead of doing it like you usually do, right? I've listened to a lot of really bad speakers testifying in front of committees, and that's given me a chance to kind of analyze what makes a good speaker. I don't know how to rate you guys because you are all so incredibly good and so much better than anything that I have heard in state legislative committees. I recognize your Generation Z, right? I call you the Parkland generation. I get emotional when I think about this because we need you. Sorry. We've just lacked so much leadership during the last few generations. And I know that you guys know that you have to go forward and make change. And I'm here now trying to help pave the way for that. And I'm sorry that we've left this mess for you all, but I am so confident that you have the ability to move forward and change this world. Thank you.
I think that was everyone, and I gotta say that I want to thank everybody for those words of encouragement. Mr. Jacoby, I see you want to speak, so just speak.
Sorry, I'm kind of glad that you were able to slip in, because then I didn't have to follow those heartfelt, inspiring words by our 5 adjudicators. I'm going to be pulling the adjudicators into a breakout room so that I can assist them with the next phase of doing the ranking. But I just want to echo what they said. I've run this tournament and helped out for a number of years in a number of Congress tournaments. And it's an honor that this is the end of the road for some of you in this activity, that you chose this tournament to be part of that. And we're honored that is your last experience. And I hope it was a meaningful experience for you. You know, I've had several years of alumni who have gone on to do amazing things in public service and in leadership, civically and otherwise. So thank you for all that you do to prepare for these debates, because you're not just preparing for a pro or con argument today, but as I told you in my little pep talk when we were in our little breakout room, is that you're preparing for the next debate tournament and the term paper you have to write in school and college and, you know, your future careers. And it never ceases to amaze me when I talk to somebody who works in corporate America for a Fortune 500 company, that some topic they debated, they went back to their research files and grabbed some of that information to assist them in something they were prepping for their job. And so this activity is life-changing and it matters, and all of you matter for being part of it. So thank you. You are welcome to, we're going to stop the live broadcast here.